Hey there. Tonight we're exploring why you wouldn't last a day in a California gold rush camp. The truth is, most pans yielded less than the price of an egg. The creek numbed your hands by sunrise, and the only law was a notice tacked to a pine. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise, or grab your favorite blanket and let's drift into tonight's story together. You last until breakfast, maybe. By the time the sun burns the chill of the Sierra Nevada foothills, your romantic vision of plucking fortune from a sparkling stream already smells like smoke, sweat, and bacon fat. The canvas of your tent traps the night cold, like a fridge. The ground stabs through your blanket, and whatever ate your ankles at 2 a.m. is back for round two. Get up, because this is 1850 in the California goldfields, and you wouldn't last a day. Morning here actually starts in the dark. A pick clinks outside. Somebody's already banging ore loose because daybreak is money. And more importantly, so is coffee. You step out into a half-built patchwork of dreams and splinters. Canvas tents sagging on wood frames, a scatter of rocker cradles, a maze of stakes, marking claims that look more like a toddler's idea of geometry than a legal system. It's the American river country, close enough to Coloma, but you can smell the myth. James Marshall's January 24th, 1848 finds still echoing. But in practice, you're in whichever camp has the least expensive bacon and the fewest rabid gamblers. The numbers slapped people across the face. When President James K. Polk confirmed the gold discovery in December 1848, that official nod detonated migration. By the end of 1849, tens of thousands of 49ers poured in from everywhere, and by 1852, California's non-native population had exploded to around 200,000, up from a few tens of thousands just 5 years earlier. San Francisco went from a sleepy village to 36,000 people by 1852, and its harbor jammed with hundreds of abandoned ships, more than 500 hulls by mid-1850, because crews mutinied in the most entrepreneurial way possible. They just walked off the job to go dig. You get your coffee from a pot that's been seasoned by 50 cups before yours, and you pay for it almost like a bank transaction. Cash exists, but dust rules. This is the part that bends your modern brain. Gold dust functions as money. A little brass scale sits on the trading counter, with weights set to troy units. There are 480 grains to a troy ounce, and the official US Tour ounce price is $20.67 per ounce. Merchants accept pinch-level payments with theatrical precision, and you try not to flinch as the scale teeters. Some of them shave the weights or blow on the dust to skim profit, a trick documented by more than one disgusted miner in letters home. You pay roughly $1 to $2 for a tin mug of coffee that tastes like boiled socks and charcoal, and about the same for a slab of bacon. In some camps, a single egg can go for $1. Louise Clapp, better known as Dame Shirley, wrote from the Feather River in 1851 that eggs were often a luxury item priced like jewelry. You swallow your coffee in the reality that breakfast costs more than a day's pay back east. You step into your uniform, stiff canvas or wool trousers, boots that already feel like a lawsuit, a slouch hat that once had ambitions, and a shirt that will be crusted in dirt by noon, because everything will be crusted in dirt by noon. Clothing companies back east are printing money on you. Levi Strauss arrives in San Francisco in 1853 selling durable canvas and denim trousers. But your version in 1850 has no fancy rivets. That patent comes in 1873. You shoulder a pick, shovel, and a pan. The pan is steel or tin, about 14 inches across. It looks like a simple bowl, but it's the difference between a YouTube daydream and a real backache. You head down to the river. The water is glass cold, even in summer, straight from mountain snow. Your hands go numb before you lift the first shovel. This is placer mining 101. You dig into the gravel bar, load your pan, and use water and motion to separate heavy gold from lighter sand. It's technique, not magic. You tilt the pan, swirl, and watch the lighter material slow off while heavy black sand, magnetite and hematite, collects with whatever color you're hoping for. Bayard Taylor, the journalist who rode the mania and published El Dorado in 1850, measured the hope and the hustle in real time. Early comers in 1848 and early 1849 could pull $20 to $50 a day. That window slammed. By mid-1850, daily averages for newbies dipped to single digits. You'll hear about someone pulling $1,000 in a week somewhere upstream. That becomes a rumor that keeps people in the water long after their hands say stop. The first pan shows you 2 glittering flakes. Each one is the size of a breadcrumb. On a scale, those tiny winds measure in grains. 10 grains, maybe 20. That's a 40th of an ounce on a good swirl, worth about 50 cents if you're lucky. You are an hour into the day, and already feeling like the bad end of a self-improvement podcast. The river takes. You learn fast that the bedrock cracks are the bank. Gold drops like an anvil. When water slows down, it hides in crevices and behind big boulders. You pry up slabs of stone, your fingers turn purple in the cold, and you wedge the pan into spots so tight you swear this is qualified as yoga. You try a rocker, because the pan is too slow. The rocker, also called a cradle, sits on rockers like a baby bed built by a carpenter with a drinking problem. You shovel gravel into the top, pour water, and rock the whole contraption, while riffles inside catch heavy material. A long tom does the same job on a bigger scale, but it needs more water and a team to keep it fed. The need for throughput breeds teamwork. In a place that tells stories about lone wolves, 2 or 3 people work a rocker efficiently. A long tom eats gravel like a dragon, but gags for water if you don't set it up right. That just you and your pan narrative makes for good posters. The real daily grind is collaborative, muddy, and boring. And then there's quicksilver. That friendly silver liquid that slides around in your palm. Mercury. Miners use it to amalgamate fine gold because the metal sticks to mercury and not to sand. It works like a cheat code and it sows long-term damage. The US Geological Survey estimates around 26 million pounds of mercury were used in gold extraction in California and roughly 12 million pounds sluiced into waterways and sediments during the rush years and after. In 1850, you won't know the neurotoxicity numbers, but you will notice the headaches, the tremors, and the slack jaws of the busiest amalgamators. You are not alone on this riverbank. The camp is multilingual and multi-ethnic. American-born men from Maine to Missouri, veterans of earlier gold fields from Mexico and Chile, Chinese miners who begin arriving in larger numbers by 1850 and surge past 20,000 by 1852, Australians, Germans, Frenchmen, Hawaiians. Methods mix too. Chilean and Mexican miners bring the batalla, a wooden dish that works with finesse on fine gold. Americans treat the Nabataean like a magic hat until they try it and realize technique matters more than the tool. This is a global crowd, elbowing into creeks that have been villages for indigenous people for millennia. The scale of that collision is catastrophic. California's native population collapses under disease, displacement, starvation, and violence in a few short years. The new state government, admitted to the Union on September 9, 1850, passes the Act for the Government and Protection of Indians that same year, which legalizes forced labor through vague apprenticeship and vagrancy laws. Official militia campaigns and private vigilante raids kill thousands. The human cost hides off camera in most Hollywood depictions, but it sits at the edge of your campfire every single night. Back on the gravel bar, you mark your claim with stakes and scratches. Because this camp runs on miners' law. There's no state mining code. Each camp drafts its own. How big a claim, how you mark it, how you keep it. 10 feet by 20 feet is common in crowded areas. Sometimes a stretch along the bank marked by 2 stakes and a tin can. Leave it unworked for a day or 2, and someone else can jump in. Swift, hyperlocal justice is part of the brand. A typical miners' meeting enforces fines, whipping, banishment, or, in extreme cases, hanging. Placerville earned the nickname Hangtown in 1849 after a triple hanging under a white oak. You mind that your tools stay visible. You scratch your name in the dirt, and you keep a third eye on any man who takes too much interest in your corner of river because your coffee cost $1 and your claim is all you have. You hear coughing, a distinctive wet hack, a soundtrack of the era. Lung infections ride every dust cloud, and cholera rides the water. The big cholera waves hit Sacramento and up into the Sierra foothills around 1850-1851, moving inland from ship traffic. Thousands get sick. You shoulder your shovel and accept that any mouthful of river can be a coin flip. The sun is climbing now. Heat bakes down into the bare, trampled dirt. In July and August, the foothill camps can hit 90 to 100 degrees by mid-afternoon. Your hat becomes a shelter you want to mortgage. You swap spots on the rocker. Hands, shovel, paw, rock. You work a riffle board clogged with black sand, and maybe a sparkle that keeps your heart rate too high for your calorie intake. This is not a gym day. This is a whole-body negotiation with gravity. The myths pile up against your ribs, and the facts peel them off. Those big nugget stories are real, but they are not normal. California does produce legendary pieces. Carson Hill coughs up massive gold quartz chunks in the mid-1850s. Sierra County yields the monumental nugget in 1869 at over 100 pounds. But on your day, the river deals out flecks and small pickers if it deals anything at all. A typical hard-won day in 1850 for a new miner might bring in a few dollars worth of dust. Sometimes less, sometimes nothing. The average wage in San Francisco for a laborer sits around $10 a day in 1850. Skilled carpenters can pull $12 to $16. That number ricochets through your skull every time you spill a pan. Lunch is bacon, beans, and holy bread. Flour sells at a premium when supply trains lag. Bacon more so. The supply chain that feeds you is absurd. Your coffee beans probably sailed from Brazil to New York, went around Cape Horn, and then up to San Francisco on a months-long journey that chewed through whole crews, and sometimes whole ships. Overland freight from Sacramento to these diggings runs on oxen, and good luck. Prices go wild when rain turns the trail to soup. In the winter of 1849-1850, Sacramento floods and malarial fevers stalk the valley. When supply dribbles through, you can pay 75 cents to $1 and 0 cents per pound For bacon, 50 cents to $1 per pound for flour in remote camps, and a small fortune if someone carted fresh onions up here. Scurvy waits around the corner if you live on salt pork and coffee. Miners write about teeth loosening and gums bleeding before the word scurvy gets spoken out loud. Someone hauled a crate of onions or potatoes straight through bandit country because it means profit. You treat a piece of onion like a miracle. You chew and stare at your pan. Gold dust sits in the edge like pocket lint that can pay the rent. You tap the pan to settle the heaviest bits. You have something. You don't know if it pays for dinner yet. The math is stupid. That small pile of glitter that fits on your thumbnail might be worth a few dollars. It also might be a trick on your eyes. Pyrite. Fool's gold crumbles in the pan and breaks hearts by the minute. Real gold squashes flat under a knife. Pyrite shatters. You test it. It does under pressure. Heavy and relentless. That is the little rush. It runs your brain like a drug, and it keeps people here through flood, fever, and a century's worth of cautionary tales. You remember to breathe. Then you remember the one law that holds this place together. Proximity. If you walk away, even to scratch down prices at the trading tent, you risk a claim jumper sliding in. Mining camps don't do line service or appointment systems. You want gear, you form a clump. The trading tent sells everything at a price that makes you hate capitalism and love capitalism at the same time. A shovel is $5 to $15. A decent frying pan can be $10. A pair of boots might bleed you for $25 to $100, depending on how far the nearest ship unloaded and which teamster got paid last week. Laundry is its own racket. $2 to wash a shirt. More if your shirt looks like a murder scene. A shave goes for $1, a haircut for $2. The barber's chair is a nailed board with 3 legs and a personality. Every time you spend, you weigh out dust. The man watching your pan of money is not your friend. Private minters in San Francisco like Moffat & Co. start minting gold coin by 1849 because dust is a nightmare to standardize, and in 1854 the U.S. opens a branch mint in San Francisco to legitimize the flow. In 1850 you have a purse of cloth and a scale of brass, and each pinch is a prayer to the gods of not getting cheated. The afternoon stretches like a rubber band. Even with the rocker, your output barely cracks what you'd consider gas money if this were an auto age. Rocking the cradle shreds your shoulders. Your boots have their own gravity, but the river feels like mercury on your feet. Cold and quick. A cloud bank threatens rain and spools out. No flood today. But you've heard the stories about men losing everything in minutes when a thunderstorm swells a creek into a saw blade. Some camps set lookouts to scream when the water turns brown and rises. The laws shift under your feet, literally and figuratively. Early on, the camps write rules that seem fair when everybody's new. Then large outfits muscle in. By 1851 and beyond, the easy river gold fades, and the industry shifts to deep diggings, and after 1853, the hydraulic monster hoses. That high-pressure technology tears whole hillsides into slurry and sends millions of tons of silt downstream, burying farms and poisoning rivers with mercury. You aren't there yet, but the clock is ticking. Even in 1850, small groups pool tools and labor to wrest gold from deeper layers, sinking coyote holes down to ancient riverbeds and ventilating those tunnels with canvas and hope. When you walk past one of those pits, you hear the echoes of pecan gravel and breathe dust that tastes like pennies. You keep half an ear open for news, because information here is as valuable as tools. The foreign miners' tax passed in April 1850 hits non-citizen miners with a $20 monthly fee. That is an outrageous extraction that falls hardest on Latin American and Chinese miners. Protests follow. Violence, too. The law gets repealed in early 1851 after pushback. Then the state retools it in 1852 to target Chinese miners, specifically with a $3 monthly tax that gets raised later. Repealed, reimposed, renamed, whatever you call it. The pattern is unmistakable. Racist harassment becomes policy as local majorities decide who counts and who pays. Some camps ignore the laws. Others enforce them with bans, fines, and fists. You are told to mind your claim. You also mind your neighbour's accent, because the line between crew and target can redraw overnight. Back at the water, your hands ache with the metallic taste of the idea of fortune. You scrape crevices with a pocket knife and chase gleam into the cracks. You are part prospector and part proselytizer now, because each fleck reaffirms the gold is here. Gospel. The clink of a nugget on bedrock is a sound people write about like prophecy. For you it's mostly rasp and slosh, punctuated by a glint that holds your attention hostage. Mid-afternoon. You break because your back writes a cease and desist. You shuffle to the cook fire. A tin plate. A chunk of bread. The last of the bacon. A man nearby stares at a photograph tucked in a hatband. That detail sits in dozens of 1849 diaries, because memory was the only entertainment that didn't charge admission. Bands do play. Fiddles are common. A battered accordion shows up like a party. The Smithsonian could curate a whole exhibit from the weird instruments that rode into the diggings. You reach for your canteen and hope it doesn't taste like yesterday's coffee. Water and whiskey come out of the same barrel in more than one saloon. Walking through camp feels like moving through a fever dream where everything costs too much and nothing is built to last. You pass a gambler's tent with faro and monte tables, cards slapping down like a drumbeat. Faro is the game of choice out here. Simple to learn and lethal to the wallet. The house edge skims a few percent, and a few percent from miners' wages across 1,000 hands turns into fortunes. Gambling houses often move more money in an evening than a hard crew of men could win from the earth in a week. The edges on these tables are polished by desperation and bravado. A quick round of the gold dust versus coin argument breaks out along the tent. Dust is too easy to rig. Coin is too little and too late. Men wave pouches as if they're flirting. You don't go near the tables if you want to keep your stake. You drift toward the supply row. Tools, flour, sugar, tobacco. Tobacco sells like contraband oxygen. A pipeful costs like a breakfast. You watch a man weigh out dust to buy a battered hat that looks older than the Republic. You test a new shovel in your hand and put it back because your funds are limited to whatever glitter sits in a rag tied under your belt. You pass a boarding tent with hot meals painted on a door plank. And what counts as hot here is anything that touched iron since sunrise. The cook demands your loyalty to bacon and makes a stew that hints at vegetables without actually containing any. A woman at a laundry line wrings shirts in soapy water and laughs at men who balk at the price. Women in the camps are rare in 1850. In some places, the ratio runs 90 men to 1 woman. Those numbers shift later in the decade. But for now, the economy prices every chore you didn't learn to do at home. Laundry becomes a gold mine. Restaurants, too. The people who get rich consistently in gold country are merchants, not miners. Leland Stanford sells supplies in Sacramento before he goes on to help build a university. Samuel Brannan, a Mormon elder turned entrepreneur, once ran down San Francisco streets yelling about gold with a vial in hand, then sold picks and pans at a markup that would make a venture capitalist blush. You stand in a place designed to sell you back your own dream. By late afternoon, Your claims of patience are down to a thin thread. You go back to the river because you have to, and because your brain hasn't quite given up on the sparkle. You wedge the pan into the last promising pocket you can reach without drowning. The sun slides west and turns everything burnished and beautiful, which feels like a personal attack at this point. The pan finally sheets off to show a small crescent of dust and a couple of heavier flakes, maybe a picker that clinks. You suck in a breath like that. One tiny piece pays your way home. It does not. It pays for dinner and laundry, maybe, if the scale isn't set by a man with a grudge. You wipe sweat and decide that you either love the work for the work's sake or you love gambling on the idea of tomorrow. Both are historically documented coping mechanisms. Evening comes fast in the foothills. The heat leaks out of the dirt and the cold arrives with a knife. The camp turns inside out like a shirt. Everything that pretended to be quiet becomes loud. Fiddles come out. A man takes a swing at another man near a gaming table, and someone else grabs both and separates them because nobody wants a dead body near the stew. Lit candles blink and sputter in greasy tallow lamps. Fire has chewed through this camp before. You can see it in the scorched boards that make up half the tables. San Francisco burned major sections of itself 5 times between December 1849 and June 1851, as shanty cities met the concept of open flame. So a remote camp, built from the same materials, tends to be very alert to sparks. A bucket line materializes when a lamp tips. That same bucket line dissolves into applause when a fiddler stomps out a jig on a plank floor that was a wagon bed this morning, and a stage tonight. A man parades through with a scale and offers to buy gold dust. He has good weights. You know this because his brand is known in the district. The big-name scales draw money like magnets because enough people have been burned by shaved weights and damp dust to learn the difference. Someone else walks by with a tray of pastries that smell like sugar off a ship. He sells them for $2 apiece to men whose last fruit came dried in a sack in Missouri. The pastry man is either a culinary genius or a pirate, possibly both. There is a line at his tray that proves a real economy operates here. If you define economy as the process by which hope gets converted into carbs, a miners' meeting bangs a plank with a mallet in the center of camp. There is some dispute, because there is always a dispute. The rules get read. Claim size is reaffirmed. Work requirements are stressed, because idle claims breed fights. The crowd votes to reinforce the ban on carrying weapons into the gaming tents. The crowd also votes to enforce fines on anyone caught stealing tools, because stealing tools is equivalent to kneecapping a man's livelihood here. You nod without nodding. This is the Atlantic City boardwalk of 1850, if the boardwalk were made of pine sticks and everyone had a shovel. The violence everyone mentions, but no brochure ever prints sits in the corners of the room. Dueling, fistfights, ambushes on trails. The homicide rate in San Francisco in 1850 and 1851 climbs into the horror story range as the boomtown outgrows its ability to police itself. Vigilance committees form in 1851 and again in 1856 to clean up the city with rope and rhetoric. In the camps, murder often means quick trial and quicker rope. Hangtown doesn't invent lynch law, but it brands it. You sleep a little lighter knowing that half the men around you carry knives and some carry pistols, and a shout at 2 a.m. means either fire or theft. You keep your dust in a bag sewn into your clothing. Hiding it under your pillow is an advertisement for a midnight strangling. Some men pledge Sunday to the Sabbath. Others pledge it to gambling or laundry. The river doesn't care. If the river runs low enough, Sunday becomes a day for damming and diverting. Crews pile brush and stone to twist the current away from an exposed bar, then dig like lunatics while the water level drops. This is mining as civic project. And sometimes it works. Often it just rearranges a creek for the next storm to rearrange again. A few minutes of low water can pay a month's worth of bacon. Or it can produce nothing but flood mud and an explanation you already know too well. You stand near one of the few women in camp because human voices pitched above a growl feel like a gift. She's here with family, or she runs a boarding house, or she owns a piece of the laundry tent. Those are the common routes for women in 1850 in the diggings. Sex work exists here too, in volumes that make preachers write thick tracts and saloon. Owners write thin rules. Exploitation flows wherever mobility and cash meet. This is not a morality play. This is a company town without the company. Darkness pulls in tight. The stars over the Sierra are a cold chandelier. You pull a blanket around your shoulders and half listen to a song from back east that a man swears he learned on the Mississippi, though it sounds like it was born in a boarding house on Kearney Street last week. The shared repertoire is soup, Irish tunes, German waltzes, Mexican rancheras, hymns turned sideways, Stephen Foster's Camptown Races, hits in 1850 and slides into the rotation like it had been there forever. Because any song with a chorus men can shout gets tenure immediately. You look at the pan that sits by your bedroll, like a dog waiting for its master, and decide that pain with a purpose is a lullaby, if you're tired enough. You tally the day because that habit is carved into everyone by necessity. Let's do the math while your back protests. Maybe you cleared $5 in dust, maybe 8, if you had a miracle crevice. You scraped out 20. If the rumor 2 bends upstream was true, a crew of 4 men took out 100 in a long day, which after splitting and paying for water rights and board comes to a number that makes a carpenter in San Francisco shake his head and go back to finishing door frames for $15 a day. The peak gold production year in the early rush is 1852, with around $81 million total in gold. Count it at the US mint price, which looks like a river of money until you watch it divide by bodies and disappear into supply chains and fraud. You look down at your hands. The nails have a new geography. The cuts have their own zip codes. The mercury glint on your skin has made friends with the concept of permanence. You spit, and it looks like coffee grounds. You're not sick yet, but the camp says the odds never left the house. You remember that hundreds died on the ships and trails to get here, from Panama fevers, from cholera crossings, from 1,000 ordinary misfortunes turned fatal by distance. The overland journey clocked in at 4 to 6 months for many wagons, and sea voyages could take 150 to 200 days. Your path to the river probably ate shoes and friends both. That investment sits like a rock in your gut and makes quitting feel heavier than a sack of wet gravel. The stories people write home from these camps become the history everyone reads, and a lot of them are honest. Bayard Taylor wrote about the promises and the scams. J. Goldsborough Bruff sketched the trail west and showed how many wagons died in the desert heat. Louise Dame Shirley Clapp wrote letters that pinned the gold fields to the page with a needle made of wit and concern. Their details are sharp because the hunger was sharp. None of them confuse luck with a plan. You sit with that because that is the religion of the place as much as any prayer. You are within earshot of a dispute that turns quickly into a knot of men, and then just as quickly it unwinds. A chair falls over. The gossip begins. You absorb it like smoke. Every evening draws a little circle around the day's biggest find and the day's biggest loss. Someone found a fist-sized nugget not far away last week, and a man across the river got robbed at gunpoint on the trail. Someone else died of fever. The news whiplashes you because that is how you keep going. You hang your hope on the find and outsource the fear to the other man's story. The smoke from a dozen cook fires smells like pine and fat, and the lingering idea of home. That thought keeps men here longer than the math says they should stay. They build little shrines out of habit. A coffee tin turned flower pot, a shelf whittled from a plank, a photograph wedged above a bedroll. The bedroll is a mattress of pine needles on dirt and a flood insurance policy equal to a prayer. A man 2 tenths over knots rawhide into boots because the roads ate his last pair. You add another stick to the fire because the cold is writing arguments in your bones. The Chinese miners in a circle near the edge of camp cook rice and vegetables in a way that makes your mouth water. Since you've had nothing green that wasn't skepticism in weeks, they will face taxes and harassment and outright attacks in some camps by the end of the year. Despite that, they will keep working in organized crews, scouring abandoned claims with an efficiency that irritates and impresses in equal measure. People who dismiss them as quiet discover quickly that quiet does not mean weak. Records from 1852 show over 20,000 Chinese arrivals in California, many of them heading straight for the diggings. They work, they save, they send money home, and they hold tragedy at arm's length with community structures called huguan. When they can, you swallow an ache that isn't from the pick. The truth of this place is that it lives on margins. Margins of law, margins of luck, margins of human stamina, margins of morality. It writes futures in shorthand and erases pasts with the same hand. When people later talk about the spirit of 49, they usually mean the myth that individual grit inevitably translates to wealth. The actual ledger shows grit translating to survival more often than not, wealth arriving rarely, and opportunists with contraband scales making a killing. This is the part that tastes bitter. Samuel Brannan reportedly became California's first millionaire, and he did it by selling shovels. You pull your blanket up around your shoulders and lie back. The stars here refuse to quit. There is no electric glow to drown them, only a Milky Way so thick you could use it to stir coffee if you had a ladder. Men talk in low voices about going home, or moving on to the next river, or heading south to the Mariposa diggings, where John C. Fremont staked his claim to glory among rocks and lawsuits. Someone mentions that the US Tabia mint price of gold never changes, but the price of everything else never stays put. Someone selects a twig and cleans his teeth. Someone else mutters about a letter from home via the isthmus that arrived months late on a steamer that ran aground. You almost smile at the absurdity of it. The only way to win here consistently is not to play the game most men came to play. You make money feeding the miners, clothing them, laundering for them, hauling their goods, or measuring their dust. You make a life by turning your back on the river and facing a ledger. Many do. The myth machine says that means admitting defeat. The ledger says that means buying a lot behind Kearny Street, selling it after the next fire, and funding a whole dynasty. The cold presses every part of you. Night in the foothills drops like a curtain. Somewhere upstream, a man hollers and laughs, which means someone found something or someone fell into the river. And either way, the camp uses the same sound. Music threads over canvas, like a promise that the world outside of this ditch still exists. Your eyelids sag. You wonder what kind of human can thrive in this place without cracking. Historical documents answer that, with receipts and body counts. The ones who thrive are stubborn, connected, flexible, and not wedded to a pan. The ones who crack are the ones who believe the poster version of history is any kind of map. You fell for the poster too. Everyone did. That's how a place goes from a mission province to a state in 2 years, How San Francisco goes from sand dunes to city in a few seasons. How a river collects 12 million pounds of mercury by accident. A place like this turns individual decisions into a continental consequence. You will be told that hard work pays off. You will not be told that the definition of pays off includes survival and sometimes not dying. Your day began with a coffee that cost a scandal. It ends with a blanket that smells like you committed a felony in it. Today's gold didn't cover your costs. Today's aches will. Tomorrow cycled in last week with the same promise it gives everyone. This might be the day. The locals laugh about that with the skull-deep knowledge that this might be the day is the fuel in everybody's tank. You let the fire do the talking and stare at your pan a last time as if it could answer for the universe. You wouldn't last a day because a day here isn't just hours. It's an agreement to keep losing small and hoping big in a system that monetizes both. The fantasy runs on flex and rumors. The reality runs on markups and muscle. The myth of the lone prospector picks its teeth with the fact of community by necessity. You roll onto your side and tug the blanket up. You are asleep before you finish the thought that men like you will call it quits by winter, or next summer, or at the first hard rain. Some will stay and go deep. Some will leave and tell stories that smooth the edges they couldn't stand to admit. The pan sitting by your head catches a moonbeam and looks like a halo on a very grubby saint. Morning is a few hours away. The pick will clink again. The river will pretend to be generous, then prove it is not. And a great many people who tell this story later will forget how much a cup of coffee cost. That is the human brain. It keeps the glint and loses the receipt. Let's dive into our next piece. How Inuit people survived Arctic winters. Your sun just ducked below the horizon, and it is not coming back for weeks. At 72 degrees north, that means the long blue hour of the Arctic winter, the kind that swallows a calendar. Air that strips heat like a thief, wind that bites through aluminum. The weather report does not bother with gentleness. Minus 30-something Celsius on a decent day. Minus 45 on a bad one, with wind that makes steel behave like cheap glass. You step into it anyway. Your shelter is not a log cabin. Trees do not volunteer here. Driftwood is rare. Rocks are cold, and unforgiving heat sinks. Your house is snow. You take a snow knife and cut blocks from wind-packed drifts, the kind sculpted by sastrugi that tell you exactly where the best building material formed. The snow has to be old enough to sinter and dense enough to hold an edge, about 0.3 to 0.5 G per cubic centimeter. You slice rectangles roughly 60 centimeters tall, 90 long, 15 to 20 thick. Each block weighs like a toddler who just discovered bread. They stack into a spiral, tilted inward, a geometry trick that looks like magic and feels like calculus with frostbite. Your spiral closes not with a shout, but with a keystone block pressed into place from the inside. You seal the seams with loose snow, the Arctic equivalent of cork. Rasmussen wrote about builders finishing a traveler glue in under 2 hours, with a decent knife and good drift, and that was not bragging. That was Tuesday. Inside, the temperature rises fast from lethal to livable. Body heat, the low whisper of a soapstone lamp, and sheer design do the heavy lifting. Snow shocks the air outside at minus 35, but inside it becomes a blanket. Snow is 95% trapped air. That dome is basically a spherical, hyper-efficient foam cooler. You cut a low entrance tunnel that traps cold air like a moat. The sleeping platform is raised above the floor by 30 to 60 centimeters because heat stratifies and you enjoy physics when it benefits you. With 20 centimeters of hard snow wall between you and the outside, The inside can hover around -5 to 5 degrees Celsius, with people alone, climbing into the teens if your lamp works and your block joinery is on point. Nud Rasmussen and Peter Frauchen both recorded interiors warm enough to sit without gloves while the world howled, and they did not embellish that for Instagram. But you do not live only in snow houses. That's the myth with the catchy packaging. Your travel shelters are snow. Your winter base is often a semi-subterranean sod house, a low, draped den built of stone, driftwood ribs, bones, if driftwood lost the argument that year, then sealed with sod and banked with snow. You build those on stable permafrost because the ground is basically a frozen freezer and a foundation. The entrance is long and low, an S-curve tunnel with a cold trap, usually facing away from prevailing winds. The sleeping platforms are wooden or stone frames covered in caribou skins, fur side up. You lay down on insulation that grew on a highly motivated herbivore. Archaeologists like Diamond Jenness documented these houses in the Central Arctic in the 1910s and 1920s, and the floor plans do not lie. Human ingenuity carved into a tundra that offers nothing for free. The light in your house is a flame in a soapstone bowl. The cullic is your heart and your hazard. You set a wick from dried moss or cotton grass along the rim and feed it seal oil. The flame edges along like a sunrise in miniature. One lamp lights a room, boils water slowly, dries mittens, melts snow, and holds the night back. It is not a bonfire. It is a steady, patient, civilized star. You trim the wick with a carved bone tool because soot is free, but messy, and you do not waste fuel for drama. You open a vent hole in your roof, just a small one, because death does not knock before carbon monoxide arrives. Elders told anthropologists, like Rasmussen's simple truths, keep it burning low, and even keep your vent open, and keep your head clear enough to notice the smell change. Your clothes are engineering, disguised as fur. Not fur like a fashion boutique, fur like an aerospace lab. 2 parkas, one inside out, one outside in. Inner garment fur toward the skin, for loft. Outer garment fur outward to break the wind. Caribou fur is the gold standard, each hair a hollow tube that traps air better than modern synthetics. Winter hides taken in late fall have long, dense guard hairs and maximum loft, and that matters. One layer of that, combined with a windproof barrier, can outperform most modern jackets in dry cold. Boots, kamit, are sealskin on the outside for waterproofing and caribou on the inside for warmth, usually with multiple socks and grass, or moss insoles that you can dry over the lamp. Mittens are 2-piece, inner and outer, big enough to trap air and small enough to hold a harpoon. A hood is huge, tunnel-shaped, with a ruff of wolverine, or wolf that sheds frost instead of collecting it on your face. That specific fur choice is not aesthetic. Frost does not stick easily to it due to the smoothness of the hairs. That is your anti-ice tech. Your eyes get protection too. Spring sun on new snow can cut your retinitis like a laser with childhood issues. No goggles carved from driftwood, bone, antler, or ivory. Sit across your face, tight enough to keep out glare, with thin horizontal slits. The Inuktitut word, Igak, names them in some regions. The slits reduce the angle of light and the exposure of your retina. This is not trial by error anymore. This is standardized safety. Franz Boas saw them in 1883 on Baffin Island, and he saw the raw wounds on people who learned the hard way not to go bare-eyed after a storm. You carry a knife that can be a scalpel or a small sword, ulu for skinning and food prep, snow knife for blocks, ice chisel for seal holes, harpoon shaft for leverage, a toolkit sized for a sled, but able to build a life. Metal is a luxury before the 1800s, in many places, but you wield copper where it exists naturally around Coronation Gulf. That is why the anthropology literature calls one group the copper Inuit or Inuit. Elsewhere you carve from antler, bone, or stone. Flensing knives crafted from slate, sleds bound with rawhide lashing, because nails shatter in the cold anyway. Every joint is flexible, because wood fibers and sinew understand that rigid things die young in a world that breathes in storms. Now say you are out on the sea ice, because food does not walk into your tunnel with a receipt. Ringed seal breathes through holes, called aglu, black punctures in the white lid of the earth. You visit those holes like a mailman who delivers a single message. You stand still for hours, motionless, in a world allergic to motion. The net of patience is your trap. A frost-smoke plume at the hole's rim gives away a recent exhale. A thin skim of ice might form. You clear it gently with a hook so you do not spook your provider. When the seal surfaces, you strike. The harpoon head toggles when it hits, turning sideways under the skin, like a tiny anchor. A sealskin line takes the shock. A wooden shaft attaches so the line can run without snapping. Your job is to keep calm and keep pressure until your partner stops diving. That technique kept people alive along coasts from Alaska to Greenland for at least 1,000 winters. Jennis described Netziling hunters waiting at holes for half a day at 40 below. And he did not call it heroic. He called it routine. You butcher with precision, because food is more than meat. Blubber is lamp fuel and calories for dogs and people. Meat feeds families. Organs become delicacies and essential vitamins. There is a reason scurvy wrecked European expeditions while you kept going. Vitamin C hides in raw meat and skin. Muktuk, the skin and blubber of whales, contains roughly 20 to 35 milligrams of vitamin C per 100 grams, enough to cover daily needs without a single orange in sight. Raw ringed seal liver, and the fresh blood can deliver more. The trick is not to overcook it. Vitamin C burns out of a pot faster than a rumor. Inuit diet leaned heavily on raw, frozen, aged or lightly boiled foods in winter, and that chemistry decision prevented bleeding gums and collapsing joints. Vilhjalmur Stefansson learned this lesson the hard public way in the 1910s, and then loudly in New York in 1928-29 during his high-fat diet experiment. Put simply, raw and lightly cooked marine mammal foods deliver vitamin C. Your grandmother could have told the Royal Navy that in 1845 and saved a lot of heavy lead coffins. You also avoid a deadly surprise by tradition. Polar bear liver is a biochemical landmine. It can contain enough vitamin A to make your hair fall out and your skin peel like a sunburn from hell. Dog liver can do the same. Stories about flesh and blood explorers stumbling into hypervitaminosis A are not dramatic fiction. Douglas Mawson's Antarctic Tale of 1913 is grim proof. Different polar, same principle. You have taboos and knowledge, and elders who say certain things are not food for people, and they are not being picky. That is survival science encoded as culture. Your calorie needs are outrageous. On winter travel, your body chews through 4,500 to 6,000 calories per day, sometimes more. Caribou meat is lean, but fat is life. Seals, walrus, whales, any animal with a thick insulating layer, these are your fuel stations. Ringed seal females weigh 50 to 70 kilograms. Males can be heavier. A large walrus offers literal tons of food, plus hide for rope and boat skins. Bowhead whales are a freight train of calories, cultural meaning, and work you do not waste. Bone, sinew, skin, fat, guts, all find a role. Soapstone pots bubble with stew. Summer berries, crowberries, blueberries, cloudberries end up frozen in sealskin bags, doled out in winter like edible sunlight. But wait. Seal hunting in winter is not your only strategy. You laid the groundwork in late summer and autumn during the great abundance. Arctic char run thick in rivers. You net and dry them in the 24-hour sunlight. Caribou cross rivers by the hundreds and sometimes thousands. Hooves clattering on stone, as precise as a metronome. Parkas and bedding rely on those animals. A single winter caribou hide weighs around 3 to 5 kilograms. 2 or 3 become an outer parka. Baby carriers and bedding soak up the rest. Women's parkas in many regions include the amort, a warm carrying pouch built into the back of the garment to shelter a baby under the hood. Infants spend their first winters with heartbeat and breath shared by their mothers, protected within an architecture of compassion. You built caches, rock cairns on ridges, shallow pits in permafrost, driftwood chests sealed with skins. Cold is your ally if you respect it. Raw meat freeze-dries itself in January. It does not rot at -30. It waits. You mark cache locations with stone in Naksud, human-shaped sentinels that are not people and not gods, but definitely not meaningless piles of rock. They guide, point to food, tell a story of someone's summer. Explorers in the 19th century often admired them without reading them, which would be like admiring a library for the cozy chairs. Travel is not optional. Your landscape moves with the ice. Leads open and close. Trails drift shut. Pollen yars form and vanish. You rely on dogs. A fan-hitched team spread wide so one dog falling through a weak spot does not pull the entire team with it. The fan hitch is a bluntly elegant solution, developed across the north. 10 to 14 dogs can haul hundreds of kilograms over sea ice ridges that look like a bulldozer tried to plow a frozen ocean and got frustrated. The sled, Kamutiek, is not a rigid plank. It is an elastic skeleton. Runners often sheathed in ice or saturated with fresh water to create a slick surface. Crossbars lashed with hide, so the whole thing flexes over pressure ridges. A loaded sled can be 3 to 5 meters long. You pack it with everything that lets you build a house overnight. Snow knife, lamps, harpoons, bedding, food, a collapsible pot. You fix it constantly because cold is not a gentle critic. Navigation at noon in December is an art that takes your whole childhood to master. In polar night you read wind. On snow, sastrugi grooved by prevailing winds show direction. Tides carve the sea ice edges. Stars do the heavy work on clear nights. The Big Dipper and Polaris line up like a map the earth prints for free. When clouds swallow the sky, you trust your memory of 1,000 trips. The wry logic of eskers and valley wines. The distant blue hint of an iceberg that has not moved in 20 years. Nud Rasmussen admired this capacity and knew it was not supernatural. It was practice plus respect. Your social rules are not cameo appearances. Sharing systems keep people alive. After a successful hunt, you distribute food by custom, not random charity. The first seal of a young hunter might go to elders as proof that success benefits everyone. The woman who cuts the meat with her olu decides division with authority earned at the skinning bench. A big whale or walrus gets mapped across households like a spreadsheet from the 1600s. A geometry of generosity. Anthropologists documented specific rules for who gets the liver, the head, the tail, The distribution varied by region, but the principle holds. No one eats alone for long here, without consequences. Call it insurance against the most predictable disaster the Arctic offers. A string of unlucky days. You hold it together, with stories and songs. When the sky has been night for 50 consecutive dinners, you play string figures, a jug of games, and drum dance under a roof of sod and smoke. You manage conflict with humor and with song duels. In some communities, two men insult and joke in verse until the crowd decides who wins. The loser loses face, but no one loses blood, and everyone gets entertainment. That is conflict resolution with a backbeat and a low-carbon footprint. Rasmussen captured some of those songs during his fifth Tool expedition, 1921-24, translating poetry that smells like seal oil and wood smoke. But wait again. There is a myth that you only ate meat and somehow shrugged at vitamins like a Marvel character. The truth is much more tactical. Seaweed gathered along the shore, sorrel snipped in summer, berries frozen in sealskin bags, rumen contents from caribou used sparingly, and the strategic rawness of daily food. Inuits across regions used fermentation too. Iguanak, aged walrus buried and allowed to ferment. Kiviark in northern Greenland, where hundreds of small seabirds are sealed in a flensed seal skin and aged for months. These foods walk a risk line and a reward line. Botulism is not imaginary. Communities developed norms, locations, and techniques to make these special foods safer. They pass down the knowledge. Like family silver, your tools are a quiet museum of elegant problem-solving. Needle from bone, with an eye bored small and neat. Sinew thread teased from the backstrap of a caribou, split and twisted and softened until it slides through hide, without tearing. Adze head from stone, lashings from walrus hide. Panna, the snow knife, shaped like a machete with a squared-off tip to cut clean blocks. Soapstone lamp, carved smooth from quarries known for generations. Some known now by archaeologists who traced quarried debris to household lamps hundreds of kilometers away, verifying that trade networks reached across the ice like a web. People swapped copper, slate, soapstone, antler and stories. Driftwood logs traveled from Siberia via the currents to Alaska and Canada. Big beams in eastern Arctic houses sometimes started life in a Russian forest. Your body is the thermostat. Sweat is not motivation. Here, sweat is the enemy. Moving too fast in -30 is an invitation for moisture to freeze into your insulation. You open your parka. You remove your hat. You slow down, let heat bleed off, then cinch things closed the moment you stop. There is a whole choreography of strings, toggles, and hood adjustments that looks like fidgeting until you realize it is survival. Your modern friend has a $700 parka and a smartwatch. You have a caribou parka and a habit of not dying. Advantage, habit. Now, the word myth with the long social media life shows up. The one that insists you have hundreds of words for snow. Jeffrey Pullum and Laura Martin have taken that myth apart in print. The real flex is not quantity for its own sake. It is the way Inuktitude and related languages build words. They are polysynthetic. Root plus suffix turns into a precise description on the fly. You say snowdrift formed by wind yesterday differently than crumbly new snow ideal for block cutting. And you do it without writing a paragraph. You have many terms, yes. Not a magical number like 400, but a practical lexicon tuned to survival. Snow that supports a sled. Snow that hides thin ice. Snow that tells you a storm came from the northeast. Words that put clues into your mouth. That is why the myth persists. People feel the precision and call it excess. It is not excess. It is exactly enough. Another myth. Igloos are permanent houses, and every Inuit lives in one all winter. Travel igloos are hotels you build out of the weather. The winter base might be a sod house, a calmer, transitional house, with a skin roof and snow insulation, or, in some regions and times, a large multi-family snow house during a festival, called a kajik. These giant snow structures could span 5 or 6 meters across and host dances and feasts. Not every community to every year, but they existed. The internet just edited out everything else, because domes photograph well. Your day in midwinter revolves around a modest routine powered by skill. Check the lamp. Scrape ice from boots. Walk out in the twilight that never brightens and check your seal holes. Listen to the ice. It booms and cracks as tides flex the flows. Pressure ridges pop like old trees. Apollonia, a stable open water area produced by currents and wind, breathes sea smoke down the coast. And that is both a hunting opportunity and a place where a northerly wind can break the ice under your sled in one gust. You carry a long pole, because falling through into salt water at -30 is not a slapstick joke. You walk with the pole extended. So if the ice fails, the pole saves your ribs and your lungs. You know where the caribou went. People keep that knowledge alive by watching lichen patches get eaten down, watching tracks funnel into passes that have worked since the Pleistocene, and storing old routes in memory like the good path to school. In the 1950s, when the US Air Force and the Canadian government started building Dew-line radar stations, and forced relocations and wage labor reshaped life, that knowledge was interrupted in some regions and stubbornly preserved in others. In earlier centuries, when climate warmed to the so-called medieval warm period, around 1000 C, and then chilled into the Little Ice Age that peaked around 1650-1850, your ancestors flexed with it. Thule people migrated east with kayaks and emiaks, sled dogs, and compound harpoons around 1200 C, replacing the more purely terrestrial-focused Dorset culture. They carried the tools you now wield. They adapted the same way you do, with a gear list and a network. Winter is not just hunting. It is maintenance and manufacture. A parka seam fails, and every needlepoint matters. Sealskin boots need drying and oiling. Sinew thread shrinks and swells with humidity. You compensate when you stitch, so that a boot does not pucker and leak. A sled runner collects grit and ice. You ice it smooth using fresh water, because salt water makes it sticky. If your region lacks wood, you source it from cached driftwood or trade. Copper points need resharpening. Children learn to make miniature sleds and harpoons, because play is training disguised as fun. That is not nostalgia. That is how a 5-year-old becomes a 15-year-old who can tie a harness with hide in a wind that steals your breath. Your health is a daily calculation. Frostbite is a silence that opens with numbness. Snow blindness arrives 12 hours after smugness. Smoke inhalation happens if you seal your house too well. Botulism lurks in a badly made agunak. Parasites like trichinella live in walrus and polar bear meat. Your ancestors learned to freeze, ferment, and cook with care to reduce those risks. They also developed social rules around pregnancy, hunting, and animal respect that served as public health policy before the term existed. Western records caricatured these as superstition. Actual elders used them as guardrails. Your calendar rides the sky. At 66.5 degrees north, the Arctic Circle, the sun stays up all day, for 1 day in June, and stays down for 1 day in December. Go farther north, and those durations stretch. At Kaaniak, Greenland, 77.5 degrees N. Polar night runs roughly from late October to mid-February. At Resolute, Nunavut, 74.7 degrees N. No sunrise from early November to early February. At Iqaluit, 63.7 degrees N. The sun still rises but barely. Average January temperatures in Iqaluit hit around minus 27.7 degrees Celsius, with wind chill hitting minus 40 and worse. According to Environment Canada, names change across borders. Cold does not. There is an industrial beauty in watching modern high-tech gear relearn what your ancestors proved. Vapor barriers show up in expedition kits. That is the Immorti concept. In a spreadsheet, layering systems mimic double caribou parkas. Moisture management inside, windproof outside, snow shelters for mountaineers, and polar scientists follow the same spiral logic as a travel igloo. Even the fans of ultralight backpacking fans quietly rediscover the idea that rigid structures snap in the cold and lashings survive. Not every winter is drama. Some are long and quiet, with the lamp steady and the dogs content. Not every story is pretty. 20th century relocations by government policy stranded families, far from familiar hunting grounds. Dogs were slaughtered in some communities by Rare Sempalm in the 1950s and 60s, a traumatic severing of mobility. Residential schools cut language lines, but the toolkit did not vanish. It sits under the bed, next to a snowmobile park today. In many homes, the Kulik still lights. The Immorti still carries children. The sled still glides across Alaska, Canada, and Greenland, Inupat, Inuilia, Inuinuangat, and Kalalit communities still go out on sea ice and still come back with seal meat gleaming like a promise. Back to your winter routine. You return to your house, the dome curve glittering with frost. Your lamp throws a yellow slice of light onto a wall of blue snow. A pot simmers slowly, the sound gentle and familiar. Your boots come off and go near the heat to dry, never too close, because hide shrinks and cracks when scorched. Your mittens hang upside down on a stick, above the lamp, to wick out moisture. Your parka hood rime shakes off outside so it does not fall into the bedding. Bedding is fur, layers of caribou, weightless and warm. That sigh when you lie down. You eat raw slivers of frozen char like the best sashimi, frozen into candy. You drink hot broth that smells like the ocean, under ice. You watch the lamps flame and the wind across your vent hole. You listen for the tick of ice expanding and contracting in the walls, a friendly house noise, and the distant thunder of a pressure ridge reorganizing the sea. Urban myths show up even here. The line that says, "You were passive victims of nature," the lazy version of survival that equates survival with luck. The real story is brutal competence. Time in, time out, year after year, with choices that reward patience. A harpoon built with 4 materials and a geometry lesson. A lamp that burns on leftovers and keeps a newborn warm. A sewing kit that outperforms a boutique brand when the thermometer breaks on the way down. Western explorers noticed, sometimes with humility. John Ray travelled with Inuit in the 1840s and 50s and lived to tell the tale because he respected local knowledge, hunted like a local, and wore fur like he meant it. Others learned, slow, and paid with fingers and lives. Fridtjof Nansen crossed Greenland in 1888 and copied the wardrobe because he had a functioning brain. He also praised sealskin boots for keeping him alive. Robert Peary wrapped himself in the knowledge of North Greenlanders and reached far north with their help. Nud Rasmussen knew because he was born in Greenland and listened before taking notes. Viljalmus Stefansson knew parts and made other parts miserable with arrogance. This is not romance, it is logistics. Your lamp wick needs trimming every hour or two. Your sled lashings need checking every morning. Your dogs need feeding with high-fat meat. A working husky can burn 10,000 calories in a brutal day. You cut meat in bars sized for mouths that do not wait politely. You store bones for marrow. You render blubber into oil for lamps in a stone pot, waiting for the liquid gold to pour. You save sinew strips in a skin bag so they do not dry into wood. You oil your needle so it slides. You cut a block of freshwater ice from a lake, or grab ancient ice from glacial bergs trapped in sea ice, because melting sea ice for water is a rookie mistake that leaves you with salty disappointment. The Winter Festival House, when it happens, is a reminder that humans crave joy as much as calories. A kaji can be a masterwork, built with long blocks arcing into a high dome that reflects the drum beats. People pour in, parkas off, body heat, raising the temperature to the point where fingertips and faces flush. Ritual hunts and dances reenact hunts, not because theatre is cute, but because memory needs a stage. Now the skeptic in your brain wants numbers and names and receipts. Anthropologists documented winter igloo diameters around 3 to 5 meters for family houses, larger kogeg up to 6 meters across, wall thickness around 20 to 40 centimeters. Build time under 90 minutes for an experienced crew. Interior temperatures recorded in field notes by R.C. Blanchard and others in the mid-20th century hovered from just below freezing to comfortable teens Celsius, with active lamps and multiple occupants. Environmentally, January means daily averages in places like Alert, Nunavut at minus 32 degrees Celsius, with historical extremes down to minus 50 degrees Celsius. The lamp's output depends on wick length and oil quality, but practitioners and ethnographers describe it as enough to melt a pot of snow and dry clothes. Slowly, not as a space heater in a modern sense. Calories from 100 grams of seal blubber, roughly 900 calories. Muktuk vitamin C values published in nutritional analyses range from around 20 to 35 milligrams per 100 g, depending on whale species and cut. The myth of hundreds of snow words is critiqued in Jeffrey Pullum's The Great Eskimo Vocabulary, Hoex, 1991, which does not deny rich terminology, just the inflated numbers. Seasonal migration and tool technology spread eastward in the archaeological record around 1200 C, replacing Dorset material culture. Dogs in fan hitch documented across the Arctic, including on 19th century engravings and 20th century photographs from Greenland and Canada. Your winter clothes in numbers. Caribou hairs contain thousands of hollow filaments per square centimeter. Thickness of guard hairs often above 1 mm with lumen space that traps air. Wolverine fur frosting resistance, documented by field users and supported by morphological studies of guard hair smoothness. A double parka system can outperform modern hardware when dry. Evaporative cooling kills that advantage, which is why you vent. You do not get a trophy. You get survival. The reward is waking up to another day where the sky glows at noon in indigo and the moon tosses silver across the snow like confetti. The lamp catches a glint on the curved wall. The dogs snore. The sled waits. The vent sighs. But wait, there is still the small rebellion of humor in the middle of all this competence. People laugh. Someone tells a story about a hunter who fell asleep at a seal hole and woke up with his mustache frozen into the snow. Not as a shame story, but as a reminder that the world outside is hilarious and cruel, and you stay alive by being humble and light on your feet. You laugh. You eat another slice of frozen char that crunches like fruity ice. You blow out your lamp to trim the wick. You light it again. The frost flowers across the inside of your wall look like a garden from a planet that enjoys reinventing itself every 12 hours. The Arctic winter is not empty. It is full of details, and the details add up. A dome you can cut from air. A lamp that runs on the ocean. A wardrobe grown by herbivores and stitched by hands with needles made from the skeletons of last year's meals. A language that builds snow into sentences that act like maps. A culture that converts sharing into insurance and singing into law. No invention is frivolous. Nothing is sloppy. That is how you survive a season where the sun takes a vacation and the wind talks louder than God. The next time a glossy magazine says, igloos are cozy because body heat alone turns them into saunas, you remember frost on your hood and a lamp wick's small stubborn flame. Cozy isn't the point. Viable is the point. The ancestors dialed in, viable with a precision that would make a Swiss watch nervous. Step outside into the blue-black. The air grabs your lungs and tells you it still runs the neighborhood. That is fine. Your boots were made from a seal that outswam a shark. Your parka remembers the tundra. Your lamp is fat and gives back light. You know where the safe ice breathes and where it lies. You move in a world that looks like it wants you dead and consistently fails because you learned how to read it. That is how Inuit people survive Arctic winters. Not in a legend, not in a meme, but on a sled, under a dome, with a lamp, in a language that builds the world as it goes. Let's dive into our next piece. The rise of the Nabataean kingdom. Masters of Petra. A sandstone canyon opens, like a trapdoor, and a city appears where a city has no business existing. Columns, cornices, and a facade called the Treasury staring down a corridor of flame-colored rock, while the sounds of water in hidden channels do something truly rude in a place that averages barely a whisper of rain. This is Petra, and the people who engineered it were the Nabataeans, a kingdom that turned deserts into toll booths and soft rock into stone flecks. The story isn't a museum whisper. It's a fast-moving, profit-first, surprisingly modern rise that left graffiti in half a dozen scripts, coins in pockets from Damascus to the Red Sea, and water flowing uphill on purpose. They didn't start as cliff-carving aristocrats. They start in the shadow of empires. The very first clear shout-out is 312 Bess in the pages of Diodorus Siculus, who reused the notes of a field reporter named Hieronymus of Cardia. The Macedonian king Antigonus, the original one-eyed boss of the Diadochi, sends a general to ambush some Arab traders near a stronghold of rock. The Greeks raid, snag silver and spices, and strut off. The Nabataeans respond by tracking them through desert country, surrounding their camp, and absolutely embarrassing them. According to Diodorus, Book 19, the Nabataeans fought mounted on camels, moved with ridiculous speed, and knew the waterholes. The Greek nobles die, the rest flee. The message is quiet and clear. People who own the water own the world. That rock stronghold would be Petra. A Semitic name, Rakhmu or Rechem, lingers in the sources. Josephus says Rechem. It sits in what is now southern Jordan, guarded by a twisty kilometre-long slot canyon, called the Seek. The entrance floods unpredictably. The rock is soft and carvable, and the entire place is a fail-safe, disguised as a welcome. Strabo, writing around the time of Augustus, says straight out that the Nabataeans lived simply, drank modestly, and ran a democracy where the king gets checked by an aristocracy. Geography 16426. He admires their habit of protecting trade and punishing crime. Strabo gets some parts wrong and romantic, but he spotted the core. This was a people who took the economics of risk and turned it into a state. Their rise has 5 engines: caravans, water, credit, architecture, and a talent for playing empires off each other like a lute. Caravans first, because aromatics paid for half the marble. Frankincense and myrrh came from trees in southern Arabia, in places like Dhofar and the Hadramaut. People in the Mediterranean burned them in temples, used them in medicine, and perfumed their gods, their dead, and, to be honest, their houses. Pliny the Elder, who had spreadsheet energy about everything, lays out the route in Natural History 12.32. The journey from the incense groves to the Mediterranean had 62 stages. That is a lot of campfires and a lot of tolls. The Nabataeans didn't just tax those caravans, they ran them. They set up safe stops like Hegra, today's Madayan Sali in Saudi Arabia, and Luki Combe on the Red Sea, which the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. Section 19. Name checks in the mid-1st century C as a Nabataean port, with a Roman quartermaster collecting a 25% duty. The kingdom wedged itself exactly where the overland incense route met the sea route and the road overland to Gaza and Damascus. They sat like a very polite bouncer at the door of wealth. On the shore of the Gulf of Aqaba, they ran Ayla, modern Aqaba, and likely took a cut from goods sailing from Egypt's ports like Berenike and Myos Hormos to Arabia and India. Pliny again loses his temper about this trade, grumbling in Natural History 6.26 that Rome was hemorrhaging about 100 million sesterces a year to the luxuries of India, Arabia, and China. If he was even close, there was enough money moving to keep 3 empires fed. The Nabataeans skimmed it without ever conquering those countries. They were the toll booth that never got conquered because they were useful and annoying at the same time. Water, second engine, because the whole operation collapses without it. The annual precipitation around Petra hovers around a desert whisper. Well, under 150 millimeters per year. The Nabataeans hacked that with pure engineering. They channeled the Wadi Musa, dammed the Sikh, and cut water arteries into both canyon walls, with a gradient so slight it looks flat. Engineers estimate about 2 parts per thousand. These channels fed covered pipes of terracotta, which then poured into plastered cisterns, some of them the size of basketball courts, and some of them hidden like a miser's purse. Archaeologists like Andrew Wilson have walked those channels and measured their precision. The Nymphaeum in Petra was more than a fountain. It was a distribution point, a hydraulic heart that pulsed water to neighborhoods, craft areas, and temples. Not just in Petra. In the Negev, they built desert farm towns. Avdat, named for Obodas, the king who got deified, Shifta, and Mamshit, with contour terraces and runoff farming. They captured flash floods with check dams, slowed the water, and channeled it to vineyards and orchards. Topsoil is slippery in the Negev, so they pinned it with terraces like a carefully layered cake. The result reads like magic. Grapes in land that looks like a moonscape, and wine jars stamped with Nabataean marks. They grew crops where most people would not risk a picnic. The third engine is credit and fees. Strabo notes that they punished theft and didn't use slaves much, and that they had a kind of shareholding aristocracy. Strabo 16426. Hard details of their law are ghostly, but the epigraphy, hundreds of inscriptions on tombs and altars, shows a bureaucracy managing tomb rights, water distribution, and taxes. Caravan tolls are documented. The Periplus mentions the Roman quartermaster at Luki Combe precisely because those 25% duties were serious business. Nabataean kings minted coins early. By the 2nd century BC, advertising stability the way modern states brag about GDP. those coins, with Greek and later Aramaic legends, are receipts that say, this is a government, and it wants everyone to know it can enforce contracts, at least as well as it can carve a facade. Architecture is the fourth engine, because monuments drew people and signaled security. Petra isn't just wow, it's marketing. Al-Khazni, the treasury, with its 6 columns, ornate pediment, and supernatural timing at the end of the Sikh, likely dates to the early 1st century CE. Scholars argue about whose tomb it was. Aratus Ive, reigning 9 bars to 40 CE, remains the leading suspect, but the point is clear. The facade fuses Hellenistic decorative flair, Corinthian capitals, broken pediments, with local styles like the squared Merlin crowns that climb like steps. Interiors are usually plain, because the emphasis was always on the first impression. The monastery, Al-Dir, sits high and huge, a 1st century CE billboard in stone. The urn tomb and the so-called royal tombs. The theatre, cut to seat around 6,000 to 8,000, the colonnaded street. The great temple complex excavated by Martha Joukowski's team at Brown University. All of it is a city saying, this place is stable, powerful, and stylish enough to make foreign architects nod in respect. Religion adds the 5th engine, because it licensed the rest. The Nabataeans worshipped Dushara, Dusaras to the Greeks, often represented as aniconic blocks called betels. Alat, Al, Uzar, and Manat appear in their inscriptions and artworks. The Temple of the Winged Lions, with its female iconography, likely honored Al Uzar as the lady, a goddess with real political cachet. Kasser Bight, the freestanding temple at Petra's city centre, probably housed Dushara, pilgrimage and ritual banquets, triclinium chambers carved near tombs and high places, kept culture coherent, and they sent steady waves of pilgrims and prestige visitors who themselves were conduits for trade. All of this builds a kingdom. The king list gets solid from the 2nd century Bice. Aratus to Wolves, roughly 120 to 96 Bas. His successor, Obodasai, takes the brand out for its first real battle test. Around the 90s Bice, the Hasmonean king Alexander Janes is trying to carve more territory out of the desert. He messes with the Nabataeans. Obodasai catches him near the Golan Heights and humiliates him. Josephus reports a rout in Antiquities 1:3135. Later, around 85-84 birth, Antiochus, Dacarus, Dionysus, a Seleucid desperate for relevance, takes a swing at the Nabataeans and dies in the fighting near a place Josephus calls Cana. 2 enemies both defeated. A coronation in blood. Oboda's eye is followed by Aratus III, whose coins call him Phil-Hellene, the Greek lover, a title meant to calm Hellenistic city elites in places like Damascus. He doesn't just calm them, he takes their city. Around 85 by Aratus III gains control of Damascus during the meltdown of the Seleucid state. Coins minted there advertise his rule, and he holds it until Tigranes of Armenia rolls through. In the early 70s, the Nabataeans become a Mediterranean power by portfolio. Petra and the Negev to the south, Damascus to the north for a while. That's geoeconomic hedge funding. Rome enters like a new app that will eventually kill the business model, but first help scale it. In 63 BC, Pompey the Great breaks the Seleucid corpse into provinces and client states. Aratus the Fry plays the Roman wars in Judea like a seasoned lobbyist, backing Hyrcanus II against the firebrand Aristobulus II. The Roman commander Scaurus marches into Nabataean territory around 62-61 back and besieges Petra. Josephus says, Aratus pays an enormous bribe for scorers to leave. Antiquities 1451. Rome gets its taste. The Nabataeans keep their independence. Both sides feel clever. Then Cleopatra V and the Dead Sea bitumen industry enter the chat. The black asphalt, lumps from the Dead Sea waterproof ships and jars, and help mummification happen. It's desert oil before oil. Strabo 16245 tells a story that sounds like a satirical column. Cleopatra tries to secure the bitumen monopoly. She sends a squadron of men on rafts. Arab tribes loyal to the Nabataeans attack and sink them. The Queen of Egypt and the merchants of the desert fight a quiet war over floating tar. The Nabataeans are not just desert traders. They are resource kings. Kings rotate again. Malichus I rules roughly 60 to 30 bus, navigating the late Republican chaos. At one point, the Roman general Cassius Longinus squeezes the region for money in 43 bars and forces Malichus to pay a fortune. Josephus 700 talents from the Nabataeans. Abodus takes over around 30 bars. Under him, a high official named Sylleus becomes a headline. Augustus backs a Roman expedition into Arabia Felix in 26 bars, led by Aelius Gallus. Sylleus serves as guide. The route he picks is a nightmare. The Romans lose time, lose men, and lose patience. They return sick and angry. Sylleus later gets executed in Rome for a bouquet of crimes, including lying. The takeaway is loud. Nabataean ministers could troll empires in real time. The big builder and brand refiner is Aratus Ive, ruling from 9 bus to 40 C. Under him, Petra explodes in stone and stucco. The treasury, the theatre, the colonnaded street, the expansion of waterworks, and the explosion of fine painted pottery. Nabataean fine ware, eggshell thin, orange red, with delicate floral motifs, appear on a scale that reads like a skyline race. Coins of Aratus Ive and his queen Shakilat show the royal couple together, a royal brand strategy older than Instagram couple goals. This is when the kingdom feels like a hyper-efficient mid-size power. The empire next door notices. Herod Antipas divorces Aratus' daughter to marry Herodias. Aratus sends an army. Herod Antipas loses the battle in 36 Se. The Roman governor Vitellius prepares to punish Aretus as Tiberius orders, then pauses when Tiberius dies in 37. The story spools into Christian texts. John the Baptist's execution sits inside this context, and the Apostle Paul remembers an ethnarch under King Aretas in Damascus trying to arrest him, 2 Corinthians 11:32. This kingdom's reach touches New Testament footnotes. While stones go up in Petra, the frontier spreads out. Hegra, today's Al-Ula region in Saudi Arabia, becomes the southern capital. It hosts 100+ monumental tombs. 111 have been inventoried, with inscriptions naming families, dates, and fines for grave robbing. The scripts are Nabataean Aramaic. The names are often Arabic, and the style is pure advertisement of status. Little Petra, Sik al-Barid, acts as a caravan hostel and party annex, with frescoes of vines and cupids in a painted dining room that scream cosmopolitan taste. There is red paint on the carved capitals, proving that classical taste in antiquity wasn't beige minimalism. The road across the Negev gets dotted with stations and farms that made sure a camel caravan could move 20 to 30 kilometers a day without dying. Each stop a combination of water, shade, and tax collection. Under Malichus, to wander. Under Malichus, the empire keeps humming, even as Rome's sea trade to India spikes. Monsoon winds let big ships cross the Indian Ocean faster, and the Indian connection starts to steal the incense thunder. The Peri Plus offers a snapshot. Merchants leave the Nile, hit the Red Sea ports in July, ride the winds to Muziris, and haul pepper, pearls, ivory, and textiles back into the Mediterranean. The Nabataeans don't collapse. They pivot. Their ports matter more, and their role as internal distributors and export managers becomes the business. Petra still rises on its sandstone plateau, surrounded by ridges named for kings and gods. The last king, Rabble II Sota, rules from 70 to 106. He appears on coins with a childlike face, then matures through the metal into a ruler, with the title Sota, Savior. He strengthens the northern city of Bostra in modern Syria, and takes the royal brand past Petra, past Hegra, to the fringes where caravans turn north into Syria. The kingdom is an integrated desert economy, matched to a Mediterranean superstate. It's stable enough that when it ends with a shrug rather than a bloodbath. In 106, the Roman Emperor Trajan annexes Nabataean. Cornelius Palma formalizes it. The province of Arabia is born, often called Arabia Petraea for the paperwork. Trajan brags with coins that personify Arabia as a draped woman with a camel, and then does what Roman emperors do. Builds a road. The Via Nova Traiana runs more than 400 kilometers, from Bostra to Aila at the Red Sea, knitting the hinterlands together with milestones and garrisons. Petra becomes a metropolis within a Roman province. The capital is at Bostra. The trade routes are Roman now. The tax system hums in Latin. The camel caravans still run. Debunk time, because this story drags myths behind it. Like a comet tail, Petra never vanished. It wasn't lost until the Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt stumbled on it in 1812. People lived around it, and in it, through the Byzantine and early Islamic centuries, and local Bedouin used the caves for centuries after that. The treasury wasn't a treasury either. That bullet-scarred urn on top got blasted by people who believed it held gold. It held sandstone. The lost city framing is a 19th century habit of Europeans discovering places while locals watched them dramatically rediscover something someone's grandfather could point at with a soup spoon. Another myth collapses on contact. The Nabataeans were not mysterious Greeks who wandered into the desert and learned to carve. They were Arabs. Ancient authors call them Arabs outright, and they wrote in an Aramaic script that evolved into what becomes the Arabic alphabet. Epigraphers can watch the letters flow over time, especially in southern Syria and Jordan, into the cursive connections that later get called Arabic. The Namara inscription of 328 C in southern Syria, memorializing the Lakhmid king Imru al-Qais, is both Arabic language and Nabataean-tinged script. The highway from Nabataean scribes to Arabic calligraphers is direct and paved in stone. Not everything is glam. Petra's facades are fancy. A lot of interiors are deliberately minimal. They use the front as a statement piece and the inside as a functional space. Many houses were freestanding buildings in the lower city. Rock-cut tombs were tombs, not apartments. The tomb count in the Petra Basin is staggering, easily in the hundreds, with more than 800 monuments counted by survey. But a city is more than graves. The colonnaded street, the markets, the theatre, the bathhouses, the artisan quarter, and the temples prove Petra was not just a necropolis. It was a full urban life, wedged into a harsh landscape by engineering and money. That engineering deserves a closer look, because it's where modern brains go. Silent for a minute. The entrance to the sick had a dam across Wadi Musa. The Nabataeans cut a tunnel through rock to divert floodwaters, saving the city from catastrophic flash floods. Redundant channels ran along both sides of the canyon. Covered pipes with ceramic joints reduced evaporation and contamination. Drop shafts eased pressure. Excess water got stored in dozens, likely hundreds, of cisterns distributed across neighborhoods. Hydraulics reached public fountains and private courtyards. At the Great Temple, a grand staircase rises from a plaza to a complex sprawled over roughly 7,500 square meters. Near the Temple of the Winged Lions, archaeologists uncovered a garden pool complex with a large open-air pool, island pavilion, and water flow controls. Heaps of plaster in aqueducts show care in waterproofing. The city maintained these features for centuries. People in the 1st century CE drank water that had been guided across cliffs with millimeter precision cut into 200-million-year-old sandstone, and did it more consistently than many modern cities manage. Military power in this kingdom always seemed portable. Diodorus's camel cavalry is the first tell. The archaeology shows hilltop lookouts and forts at key passes, but there's no Great Wall of Petra, because the whole landscape is a defense system. A narrow canyon with hidden water makes a siege expensive for the attacker and comfortable for the defender. The Nabataeans kept themselves safe, more with logistics than with legions. Their biggest defensive moves involved cutting off water to intruders, moving faster across emptiness than anyone expected, and using knowledge of the desert as a weapon. It worked until the trade shifted under them. Rome's embrace of Indian Ocean shipping meant more goods bypassed the overland route, where the Nabataeans had home field advantage. Palmyra to the north rose as an alternate caravan heaven, with a city plan designed around colonnades and camels. The Nabataeans leaned into the Red Sea options, kept skimming, and tried to hold the Damascus flank with Bostra. They did well because they kept Petra's step one. Water management, running. Their coinage remained light and elegant, their temples active, their roads busy. When the annexation came, it looked more like a corporate takeover than a battlefield. Reckoning. Under Rome, Petra doesn't die. It reinvents. The urn tomb becomes a church around 447. The Petra church sprouts mosaics with birds, fruit, and exotic animals, and a papyrus archive gets carbonized in a blaze, preserving contracts and tax receipts from the 6th century, evidence of families managing property, dealing with imperial bureaucracy, and minding their business. The triple-arched Roman gate gives the city a formal entrance for people who prefer carts to camels. In 363 CE, an earthquake hits hard. Archaeological layers show collapsed columns and rebuilt walls. The city keeps going. Another century later, it shrinks. Early Islamic Petra is quieter, but not empty. Crusaders later plant a small castle on El Habis Ridge to watch the crossroads, then abandon it. Through all of that, the local tribes come and go, cut inscriptions in caves, and pass down names. What about the pantheon as the kingdom enters the Roman orbit? Deities don't vanish. They rebrand. Dushara gets Romanized as Dusaris in inscriptions, and the cult keeps running in diaspora communities. Betels keep their boxy style because the abstraction solves a problem. The divine can be worshipped without anthropomorphic statues that break if someone bumps them with a camel. And a block is ideal for processions through rough terrain. In temples, however, ornament cascades. The Temple of the Winged Lions packed painted plaster, carved capitals, and cultic paraphernalia. The winged lions are carved capitals with winged felines that probably flanked the goddess's throne. The worship space is built to spark awe with sensory overload. Light flickers off painted walls, water sounds somewhere nearby, and incense smoke. Bought wholesale, one imagines, hangs in the air. Debunk reel, continued. Petra's treasury and monastery aren't leftovers from Phoenician aliens or Atlantean engineers. They're the end result of a toolkit. Soft rock, iron chisels, plumb lines, scaffolding holes still visible in the facades, skilled labor organized by foremen, and an elite willing to spend. Builders carved from the top down to prevent rock from collapsing. They lived in tents or perched in wooden frames as they cut the next set of cornices. The Alcazne facade shows drill holes where bosses used as footholds were later chiseled away. The magic reduces to methods plus time plus money, which is how most magic works. Their written record isn't a library, but what survives talks. Nabataean Aramaic inscriptions cover Hegra, Petra, Aboda/Avdat, and even Delos in the Aegean, where a Nabataean trading community set up shop in the 2nd century BC. Names pile up. Aratus, Obodas, Malicus, Shakilat, Fasael. Their scripts evolve into cursive forms that bend toward Arabic. Linguists model how letters, like Deilf and reslant and connect, and how diacritical marks later differentiate letters that look alike. The scribal hands of southern Syria and northern Arabia carry the story from a caravan kingdom to the Quranic world. It is one of those but wait legacies. The kingdom known for stone facades also passes down the pen. Their money says a lot, in the way ancient money does. Ataz wonder, Ataz coins, shout, Phil Helene to neighbours. Aratus Ive and Shakilat pose together, sometimes with cornucopia, because abundance is the signal. The iconography shifts under Rome. Nabataean script becomes rarer on civic inscriptions in the 2nd century CE as Latin and Greek take over public signage. On Trajan's coinage celebrating Arabia, a camel stands next to the personification of the province. The kind of empire that nails advertising uses local symbols, like it uses roads, strategically. Back in Petra, the city's street-level life matters, because it reveals how the rise stayed risen. Workshops lined the colonnaded street. Metal workers, potters, glassmakers, and stone carvers. Nabataean fine ware runs paper thin, fired to a glossy burnish, with painted leaves, petals, and vines. Triclinium chambers cut beside tombs show where families hosted funerary banquets that kept names alive, which doubled as social networking events before Wi-Fi. People climbed to the high place of sacrifice, up hundreds of steps carved into the mountain, leaving offerings on altars, with a view that turns the entire basin into a stage set. The Nabataeans used approaching caravans as marching backdrops, and turned every ridge into a balcony. Damascus, because that northward reach matters, adds a prestige marker. When Aretas III took it, he placed Nabataean power into old Seleucid infrastructure. This move wasn't just a land grab. It told Greek cities that the desert merchants could handle rule and create conditions they liked. Stability, taxes, sufficiently annoying to be safe, but not so heavy they killed growth. And a cosmopolitan vibe, attuned to Hellenistic taste. After Tigranes, and then Rome took Damascus back, the memory that a caravan people ran the old Hellenistic heartland lingered. It cemented the idea that this wasn't a tribe. This was a kingdom. Roots out from Petra, as strings on an instrument. And the Nabataeans played them until the annexation took the tuning away. One runs northwest to Gaza, one north to Jericho and the Jordan Valley, one northeast to Bostra, one south to Hegra, and then to the Hijaz and Yemen, and one southeast to Ayla. Road stations, Khan-like courtyards, cisterns, forts reach out like beads. Milestones. After 106 list emperors' names and distances. Before that, there's a scatter of carved standing stones and inscriptions, with distances and water points. It is not quite a Roman road system. It is a network optimized for camels and carts, not legions. The goal is to move profit, not armies. Obodas returns as a cultural icon after his death. Avdat, named for him, hosts a shrine to the deified king, attested by inscriptions calling him the god Obodas. This is not a surprise. Hellenistic heroes were often demi-divines. Nabataean kings get similar treatment. Rabble too uses Sota, savior, a title that echoes the Greek Hellenistic tradition. The Nabataeans absorb and remold cultural markers from all directions and feed them back into architecture and cult. The Roman annexation's immediate aftermath proves the system was resilient. Petra's population, estimated at 20,000 to 30,000 at its peak, doesn't vanish. It morphs. The Great Temple may get repurposed. The Temple of the Winged Lions probably remains active into the 2nd century. Residential construction continues down in the valley. Romans install an arch gate to control traffic. Local elites commission statuary that now bows a bit more to Roman taste. A Roman garrison sits at key points, drinking water from Nabataean aqueducts, because if an empire is going to borrow infrastructure, it borrows the best. Palmyra's rise takes some caravan heat, sure, but Petra remains a target in the itineraries because of its water and habit of being jaw-dropping. Then, the earthquakes and economic shifts accumulate. The quake of 363 smashes buildings across the Levant. The city rebuilds smaller. The churches go up as Christianity becomes the official religion, and Nabataean gods get quietly retired into inscriptions. The Petra papyri, mid-6th century documents, show property deals, taxes, and court cases that could bore a modern accountant until the part where a fire carbonizes the whole archive and lets archaeologists read it 1,400 years later. The Muslim conquest in the 7th century folds the region into a new political map. Petra's wells still matter. Pastoralists and local households keep living in and around the site. Crusaders show up in the 12th century, build a small castle, watch trade pass, leave. In 1812, Burckhardt, posing as a pilgrim to the tomb of Aaron, learns from locals about a place with carved facades in a canyon and talks his way in. His notes light a European obsession. The rediscovery becomes a launch point for archaeology that finally ties stories to stone. Where did the Nabataean language and script go? Into Arabic. Scholars like Michael MacDonald and Nabataean specialists like John Healy have spelled out the line of descent. The Nabataean script's cursive habits, flowing around the 1st century C, worn down by quick writing on papyrus and stone, morph into the early Arabic letter forms seen in the 4th to 6th centuries. The Namara inscription, carved in 328 Seh, uses Arabic language in a script that looks Nabataean having a confident moment. By the time the Quran gets written, the script stabilized into a more familiar shape. The alphabet people snap jokes about on chalkboards owes pen strokes to desert traders who wrote contracts under bee tiles. Nothing about their rise was inevitable. The Edomites lived around Petra in the Iron Age and had their own kingdom. The Babylonians smashed that work in the early 6th century bar. The Persians watched, the Greeks poked, the Nabataeans slipped into the vacuum. They harnessed camels, the desert's truck fleet. A single camel hauls 200 kilograms and moves 30 kilometers a day across places where horses melt. They organized routes through oases they could control, like Dedan, Modern al-Ula, and Tama, with waypoints spaced for water and shade. The economics were simple and brutal. If another tribe raided caravans, Nabataeans retaliated hard. If a city demanded robbery-level tolls, the caravan took another route. If the empire next door wanted a cheaper way to move goods than the Nabataeans smiled and offered a schedule. Strabo's description of their morals, no slaves, severe punishment for theft, reads like a desert utopia for merchants. The archaeology challenges and complicates it. The expensive facades and elite houses suggest wealth gaps. Tomb inscriptions name patrons who can fine trespassers enormous sums. 500 denarii, 1,000 denarii. 1,000 denarii, sums a laborer would struggle to see in a decade. The system was not all communal virtue, but it was regulated enough that trade partners trusted it. That trust is the miracle. A caravan from Hadramaut carried goods through 2,000 kilometers of contested land for nearly 2 months. That only works if enough people in enough places know that next waterhole exists and the taxes won't flip unpredictably. The little details arrest attention because they feel unreasonably modern. Little Petra's painted plaster shows vines curling around a Roman-style dining room. That's an interior design nod to imported wine culture in a place where the nearest rainforest is imagination. Graffiti in multiple scripts, Nabataean, Aramaic, Greek, Latin, clutter the backs of niches. Look closely up the Sikh, and there's a bitile carved into the canyon wall like a shrine for joggers. The treasury's facade has explanation scars, holes from 19th century gunfire, a naive attempt to break the urn for treasure. The monastery's interior is heavily eroded, but the front commands a plateau with a view that explains half the site's spiritual gravity. Competition is key to the rise narrative, because it shaped their strategy. Palmyra wasn't a direct clone. It ran more to the east-west axis connecting the Euphrates to the Mediterranean, and leaned on Rome until it tried to break away under Queen Zenobia in the 3rd century. The Nabataeans never raised a secessionist empire. They built a resilient, flexible micro-empire inside the spaces empires either couldn't reach or didn't understand. They fought when pushed. They bribed when sensible. They carved when they needed to broadcast legitimacy. The king's names roll like a drumbeat. Aretas, Abodas, Aretas, Malicus, Abodas, Aretas, Malicus, Rabble, each generation negotiating the same 3 variables: water, roots, and neighbors. Someone always flinches at the idea that all this was paid for by incense. But the numbers make it plausible. A kilogram of frankincense could command high prices. Once taxed and moved into the Roman world, where elite households burned it at rituals and dinner parties, and temples consumed it in routines measured in pounds. Frankincense and myrrh had medical uses and deodorized bodies in ways perfume counters still chase. Add bitumen from the Dead Sea, copper from Fainan, wine from desert vineyards, and textiles passing through from further away, and the economy looks diversified enough to survive a shock or two. When the monsoon trade boom siphoned business away, the Nabataeans leaned harder into the edges of the Red Sea. The Periplus's admission that a Roman quartermaster sat at Leucacome shows how deeply the Roman state plugged into Nabataean supply chains, rather than blowing them up. Fewer revolts occur where the tax farmer's office shares a wall with the customs house. Call it the greatest pivot. From oral-run caravans to written bureaucracies to a provincial metropolis that still made the empire feel like it was buying local. Petra's annexation didn't rip out the water channels. Romans didn't de-stucco the Great Temple. The people writing contracts in the Petra papyri sound like the grandchildren of traders who hedged caravans with prayers to Dushara. The empire overlays. It doesn't erase. Why does the rise of the Nabataean still punch above its weight, long after their kingdom became a province? Because they win 3 respect points that translate across millennia. They built a city where the map says, maybe goats. They outsmarted imperial armies with logistics and engineering, and they wrote their names in a script that morphed into one of the most widely used alphabets on Earth. Archaeologists, like Martha Zukowski, gave the Great Temple back its staircases and columns. Epigraphers like Laila Neme read the Hegra tomes to pin precise dates and family trees. Historians like Glenn Bowersock put Roman Arabia into focus. Classicists trawled Strabo, Diodorus, and Pliny to ground the lines in text. The sources interlock. The myth of a vanished people evaporates under their footnotes. The canyon narrows again in the mind, and the treasury reappears. There's always someone saying Petra is a one-hit wonder, a facade without a story. The story claps back. In 312, they hold their ground against a Diado's raid. In the 90s bus, they thrash a Hasmonean king and kill a Seleucid pretender. They run Damascus for a decade, outtip a Roman commander to lift a siege, and carrier their bitumen fights into Cleopatra's late-night strategy meetings. A Nabataean minister sends a Roman army to the wrong neighborhood and ends up in a Roman execution chamber for lying. A king's daughter becomes a leverage point in a petty Herodian divorce, and Petra's army fights the most famous petty war of the 1st century. Under Trajan, the camel becomes a Roman coin icon. Under bishops, the urn tomb becomes a church. Under 19th century guns, the treasury's urn becomes a honeycomb of bullet wounds. Petra's path to UNESCO fame rides on that first step through the Sikh. But the rise of the Nabataean kingdom started long before a tourist's gasp, with scribes cutting Aramaic into stone, kings counting talent before counting columns, and foremen bringing water to a city that didn't deserve it by nature, and took it anyway. Other desert kingdoms flickered. This one printed itself into rock and script so deeply that a modern world already absorbs its legacy every time someone writes in Arabic or drinks wine from a hillside where the rain does not belong. Their motto, if they had to pick one without breaking historical accuracy, would read like a line from Strabo rewritten for engineers. Live simply, trade aggressively, move water uphill. It worked out. The facade was gorgeous. The balance sheets were better. The desert cooperated, because people who own the water write the map. Next, let's turn our attention to the life of Catherine de' Medici. Power and poison. She was branded the Black Queen of France, accused of stocking a poison cabinet like an Italian apothecary, with a grudge, and then she watched a king die when a splintered lance punched through his eye at a victory parade. Catherine de' Medici did not just enter French history. She crashed through it in black silk, with rumours trailing behind like incense, and she kept the Valois monarchy alive for 30 years, with a mix of pageantry, paperwork, and cold-blooded pragmatism that terrified her enemies and saved her sons. Power and poison made a catchy headline. The receipts tell a different, far messier, and much more interesting story. Start in Florence, 1519. Catherine was born on the 13th of April to Lorenzo Tave de' Medici, Duke of Urbino, and Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne, a French noblewoman with serious bloodlines. Both parents died within weeks. Infant and alone in a vault of priceless sculptures and bankrupt promises, she became a Medici heiress without the money or the muscle to enjoy it. Her great-uncle Pope Leo X died in 1521. Her cousin Giulio de' Medici became Pope Clement VI in 1523. This meant Catherine's childhood unfolded inside the most luxurious form of musical chairs on earth, the Roman curia, with cardinals changing sides, spies in the choir loft, and fortunes rising and falling with the papal pulse. Florence dumped the Medici in 1527, and a 12-year-old Catherine was suddenly a bargaining chip in a city that hated her surname. The rebels stuffed her into convents as a hostage, and, according to chroniclers like Varchi and later Brantome, threatened to put her on the city walls as the imperial army closed in during the siege of Florence of 1529-1530. There was no princess training program for being dangled in front of cannons. She survived it by sitting still, saying nothing incendiary, and letting imperial forces under Charles V do the heavy lifting. When Florence surrendered in 1530 and the Medici floated back into power, Catherine learned the first rule of her life's politics. Live long enough and the wheel turns. Enter international matchmaking. Pope Clement VI needed France. France needed the papacy. Catherine came with a dazzling name, a respectable dowry, and zero political baggage of her own. The marriage contract was signed, and on the 28th of October, 1533, a 14-year-old Catherine married Henry, Duke of Orléans, the second son of Francis I of France, in Marseille. Clement VI officiated in full papal regalia. The party lasted weeks. Medici gold funded triumphal arches, mechanical animals on parade, and banquets that tasted like diplomacy. Catherine walked into the French court with Italian manners, formidable connections, and an accent that courtiers imitated behind her back. Henry had other priorities. He was shy, serious, and already emotionally attached to Diane de Poitiers, a widow almost 20 years his senior, who wore black and pearls like a uniform and a warning. Catherine shared a household with a husband who loved another woman, in a court where everyone tracked pregnancies like stock prices. The kid problem turned into an international spectacle. 10 years passed without an heir. Catherine visited doctors, midwives, and astrologers. She fasted, prayed, and endured the era's medicinal optimism, which largely involved timing, diet, and insistence. Later rumors embroidered the story with all sorts of nostrums, because the truth was painfully ordinary. Eventually, the wheel turned again. In 1544, at age 25, she delivered a son, Francis. Then she delivered 9 more children in 12 years. Elizabeth in 1545, Claude in 1547, Louis in 1549, who died in infancy, Charles in 1559, Henry in 1551, Margaret in 1553, Francis, called Alençon or Anjou, in 1555, and the twins Jean and Victoire in 1556, who both died shortly after birth. This sudden maternal success transformed her status. She became necessary. She also turned motherhood into a political portfolio. She hired humanist tutors like Jacques Amiot, organized language lessons, drilled etiquette and ceremony, and conducted the family like a diplomatic orchestra. She placed Elizabeth on the Spanish throne in 1559 as wife to Philip II. She placed Marguerite, Margot, in a position that would later explode at the center of the religious wars. She taught Charles the Next and Henry that kingship involved pageants, councils, and the ability to stand upright through 10-hour processions without choking on candle smoke. While Catherine raised heirs, Diane de Poitiers ran Henry de Sycam's heart and much of his schedule. Henry became king in 1547, when Francis I died, and he rewarded Diane with influence, property, and jewelry. He even let her wear the Queen's initials interlaced with his, on royal emblems. Catherine endured. She maneuvered in the second line, took notes, kept the accounts, and waited for time to do what time always does. The moment arrived with the sound of cheering and cracking wood. June 1559 was meant to crown a decade of diplomatic triumphs. The Peace of Cateau Cambrésis ended long wars with the Habsburgs. Paris staged tournaments on the Rue Saint-Antoine to celebrate a double wedding. Catherine's daughter Elizabeth married Philip II of Spain, and the king's sister married the Duke of Savoy. On the 30th of June, Henry Touy insisted on a final joust. He faced Gabriel de Lorgis, Count of Montgomery. A lance splintered, drove through the king's visor, and bored into his eye. The surgeons, including the legendary Ambroise Paré and the anatomist Andreas Vesalius, tried everything the century could imagine. Nothing worked. Henry died on the 10th of July, 1559, at age 40. Nostradamus had published his prophecies in 1555, with a line about a young lion overcoming an older one, piercing eyes through a golden cage. The coincidence wrote itself. Catherine leaned into mourning and into power. Widowhood reshaped her wardrobe and the monarchy. French queens traditionally wore white when mourning. Catherine wore black, an Italian style and a statement. The veil, the somber palette, the refusal to perform radiant joy again, became her brand. A walking thundercloud with a filing cabinet. She seized Censo from Diane de Poitiers within months and exiled her rival to Chaumont. At Censo she expanded the gardens and later built the elegant two-story gallery over the chair, a literal ballroom bridge. It was a move that combined vengeance, aesthetics, and a hard lesson in real estate law. Her first test as the power behind the throne came with Francis X, 15 years old and barely a ruler. He reigned from July 1559 to December 1560. Marionettes can fillet a kingdom if the strings are held by ambitious men, and the Guise brothers, Francis, Duke of Guise, and Charles, Cardinal of Lorraine, tightened their grip by using Francis's marriage to their niece Mary, Queen of Scots. Catherine had seniority as Queen Mother but limited leverage, so she executed a tightrope walk. She placated the Guise on weekdays, sympathized with rival nobles on Sundays, and spoke the language of moderation to anyone who would listen. In March 1560, a conspiracy of Protestant-leaning nobles tried to seize the young king at Amboise and break Guise control. The plan failed. Bodies hung from the castle walls. Catherine maneuvered the aftermath with damage control instinct, urging clemency where she could and absorbing the names and addresses of future problems. Francis de Haye died on the 5th of December, 1560, rumoured of an ear infection that escalated into an abscess. Charles IX, aged 10, took the crown. Catherine became regent, officially, legally, and with the full weight of a collapsing system on her shoulders. She kept Michael de l'Hôpital as Chancellor, an advocate of moderation in a time when moderation felt like a missing organ. She set out to reconcile a country dividing along religious lines that were never just about religion. Tax burdens, noble rivalry, urban militancy, and pamphlet warfare all fed the fire. She tried to change the script. In 1561, she convened the Colloquy of Poissy, a face-to-face between Catholic theologians and Protestant leaders like Theodore Beza. She allowed preaching and debated toleration as statecraft. In January 1562, she issued the Edict of Saint-Germain, also called the Edict of January, granting limited freedom of worship to Protestants outside city walls and without arms. It was the equivalent of throwing a life vest into a whirlpool. On the 1st of March 1562, the Duke of Guise stumbled on a congregation of Huguenots, worshipping in a barn near Vassy, and his retainers attacked. Dozens died. News raced. Cities armed. The first of the French wars of religion erupted. Catherine steered through the explosion. 3 factions dominated. Hardline Catholics led by the Guise, militant Huguenots led by Louis, Prince of Condé, and Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, and a growing group later called the Politiques, who prioritized civil peace over dogma. Catherine camped with the Politiques out of principle and survival. In 1563, the Edict of Amboise patched together a truce with limited rights for noble Protestants. Catherine responded to fragile peace with theatre and a roadshow. From 1564 to 1566, she took Charles the 1566. She took Charles the 1566. She took Charles the 1566. Towns received pageants, banquets, and FaceTime. The tour worked as prayer and intelligence gathering. Courtiers called it a magnificence. Catherine called it a schedule. That tour included a meeting in Bayonne in 1565 with her daughter Elizabeth, Queen of Spain. Philip II sent the Duke of Alba rather than attend in person. Later polemic claimed that Catherine and Alba agreed on a plan to exterminate French Protestants. Archives do not support a signed blueprint. The letters show worry, guarded words, and the kind of polite mutual suspicion that lubricates every conversation between an ambitious mother and a Habsburg general. Catherine left Bayonne with more anxiety than answers, and with a fresh batch of rumours attached to her shoulders. The peace did not last. In September 1567, Huguenot leaders attempted the surprise of Meaux, a lightning strike to seize Catherine and Charles the Knight. The court fled to Paris at speed. The Second War flared. The Edict of Longjumeau in 1568 tried again for calm. Then the Third War followed almost immediately. Battles at Jarnac in March 1569 and Montcontour in October 1569 produced fatalities, grief, and no final victory. Catherine's negotiating skills kept the monarchy inside the cockpit. In 1570, the Peace of Saint-Germain finally granted broader rights and 4 surety towns to Protestants, including La Rochelle and Montauban. Coligny returned to court with a king willing to listen. Catherine swallowed hard and made room. Her strategy for stabilizing the kingdom involved marriage alliances and festivals bright enough to distract for a minute or 10. The crown announced a union between her daughter Margaret of Valois and Henry of Navarre, the leading Protestant prince, and future Henry. The wedding in Paris in August 1572 drew Huguenot nobles into the capital under a promise of safety. The plan intended reconciliation through a dynastic knot and a week of choreography. It almost worked. On 22 August 1572, an assassin shot Admiral Coligny on the Rue de Bassy. He survived with a mangled hand. Panic and rage split the court. Charles next leaned toward Coligny, and Coligny leaned toward a French intervention in the Netherlands against Spain. Catherine feared dragging a bankrupt France into another war, while the Guise clan sharpened their knives. On the night of 23, the 24th of August, the Royal Council resolved to eliminate a small group of Protestant leaders to prevent an uprising. The decision detonated in the worst possible way. Militia captains in Paris took it as a green light. The bell of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois signaled action. The Guise household led a targeted strike that became a city-wide bloodbath. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre left streets running. Numbers vary. Contemporary accounts and later studies, like those by Mac P. Holt and Philip Benedict, estimate around 3,000 dead in Paris alone. Violence spread into the provinces over the following weeks, producing perhaps 10,000 to 30,000 victims across France. Catherine's reputation never recovered. Protestant polemicists in Geneva and London painted her as a Machiavellian poisoner, orchestrating every blade and bullet. She became the villain in real time. The documents complicate the poster. She almost certainly supported the decision to neutralize specific leaders after the Coligny attack, a move born of fear and misjudgment. She did not organize a general slaughter of civilians. The massacre grew beyond palace control, propelled by urban militias, old grudges, and the raw physics of crowd violence. None of that exonerated her. It did place her in the category of rulers who trigger events they cannot contain, then spend the rest of their lives chasing ghosts. Paris woke from the bloodletting to international contempt and domestic siege. The crown attacked La Rochelle in 1573 without breaking it. An exhausted truce followed. Henry Catherine's son had already left France in 1573 to be elected King of Poland-Lithuania as Henry of Valois. Catherine facilitated that crown with letters, ambassadors, and gifts because she needed a spare plan for the dynasty. When Charles IX died in May 1574 at 23, Henry sneaked out of Poland and came home to become Henry III. Henry III might have been the only Valois with a taste for incense, thick enough to match his mother's. He loved ceremony, velvet, devotions, and a household of elegant favourites, nicknamed minions by a public that enjoyed mocking them. Catherine remained the engine in the background. She negotiated, soothed, bribed, and harried. She collected information from every corner, an art at which she excelled. Her letter-writing output could crush a mule. Modern editions of her correspondence run to several thick volumes. The tone remains consistent, tireless, practical, a touch of exasperation when the men in her family confused stubbornness with strategy. She also deployed something that scandalized and fascinated in equal measure. Her so-called escadron volant, the flying squadron. Brantôme, a courtier with an eye for colour and a schedule light on restraint, described a group of Catherine's ladies who danced, flirted, and kept the political air conditioning set at a pleasing temperature. Later authors inflated this into a secret service of seduction. Women assigned to entangle powerful men and report their pillow talk to the Queen Mother. The historical core looks duller and more plausible. Catherine did keep a large, superbly trained female household. Those women were spectacular at conversation, dancing, and the theatre of court life, which happened to be where information flowed. They observed, they reported, and they charmed, because that is what a 16th century court required. Whether they served as spy entrepreneurs or simply as the most stylish intelligence network in France depends on which chronicler earns your trust. Brantôme loved a story. Catherine loved results. She adored astrologers too, and she made no secret of it. Cosimo Ruggieri read the stars for her. Nostradamus received patronage and attention, his quatrains becoming a sort of medieval Twitter feed that the literate passed around at dinner with knowing looks. Catherine built a column at the Hôtel de la Reine, later known as the Hôtel de Soissons, around 1574, a freestanding observation tower for stargazers that still stands in Paris near Les Halles. Decisions in that century moved to the rhythm of bells, masses, and planets, and Catherine used every rhythm available. She timed travel, ceremonies, and sometimes announcements with astrological symmetry. She also knew how to count bodies and coin, which matters more than Mars or Jupiter when troops require pay. The poison narrative swelled in those years, like a bruise. 1572 had made Catherine the villain, And once a culture frames a woman as a venomous widow, every death becomes a case file. Jeanne d'Albret, Queen of Navarre and mother of Henry of Navarre, died in Paris on the 9th of June 1572 while shopping for the wedding that would supposedly reconcile France. A rumor sprang up that she died after wearing perfumed gloves supplied by Catherine's Florentine perfumer, René Bianchi, better known as René Le Florentine. The image sells. Gloves soaked in arsenic feels precise. Contemporary physicians did not find classic symptoms of arsenic poisoning. Jeanne had battled chronic health problems for years, and sources describe a lung infection, or pleurisy rather than a sudden toxic collapse. The autopsy stories vary, and Ambroise Parry's name gets dragged in for credibility whether or not he was present. The glove tale looks like a classic example of partisan propaganda at the exact moment when such stories found enormous audiences. As historian R. J. Necht and others note, proof remains conspicuously absent. Other items in the poison cabinet also evaporate under light. The myth of a book with pages laced in venom, the allegedly deadly saddle pommel, the letters dipped in toxins. France in the 1560s and 1570s bred a thriving pamphlet industry that weaponized xenophobia and misogyny. Cathy the Italian became Cathy the Sorceress. Italian bankers got blamed for financial policy. Italian cooks took the heat for rising tastes. Catherine's actual skill set centered on budgets, patronage, and choreography of power. She certainly kept apothecaries close, because every elite did. She lived in a world where cosmetics included problematic ingredients, where perfumes covered odors rather than enhanced fantasies, and where medicines bled into poisons with a change in dosage. She used that world's tools and acquired that world's accusations. Meanwhile, she built. The Tuileries Palace began under her orders in 1564 on the western edge of Paris. She imported Italian architects like Philibert Delorme and sculptors who could translate her taste into limestone and stucco. She planted gardens with geometric discipline and fountains designed to surprise. An eyewitness of her feats could expect fireworks, automata and tableaux vivants that retold ancient myths with political punchlines. She expanded Chenonceau's gardens and added that gallery bridge, turning the chateau into a ribbon of ashlar stone floating above the river. Architecture doubled as message. The dynasty endures. Beauty thrives, and the Queen Mother has impeccable taste in masonry. Her entertainments evolved into a recognizable art form. Earlier in the 1560s, she pioneered the French ballet de cour, a court ballet that stitched together poetry, music, sets, and dance under a single theme. The apex came in 1580 with the Ballet Comique de la Reine, produced by Balthazar de Beaujoyeux for Henry III's court. The show lasted hours, depicted the myth of Circe, and included elaborate stage machinery. Catherine did not choreograph it personally, but her decades of cultivating musicians, dancers, poets, and engineers made events like this possible. The court watched, applauded through the night, and agreed to remember peacetime for an evening. Catherine's cultural credit did not save her from the daily humiliations of factional politics. After 1576, hardline Catholics coalesced into the Catholic League under Henry of Guise. Henry III between restoring royal authority and placating the League's muscle. Catherine negotiated a raft of edicts to trade privileges for peace. The Peace of Monsieur in 1576 was one such compromise. Named for her youngest living son, Francois, Duke of Alençon, commonly called Monsieur. He died in 1584 at 29, and with his death, the Valois male line narrowed to Henry III alone. The next heir by Salic law became Henry of Navarre, a Protestant. The League erupted in fury. The spiral tightened. Her last years became a cross-country shuttle. Even in her 60s, she travelled to broker deals, cool tempers, and catalogue betrayals. Her letters from the late 1580s read like dispatches from a front that kept redrawing itself overnight. In 1588, the day of the barricades in Paris booted Henry III out of his capital with a spontaneous uprising orchestrated by League captains and popular anger. The king lured Henry of Guise to Blois and had him assassinated on the 23rd of December 1588. Catherine was in Blois. She was ill, exhausted, and staring at the outcome of decades of politics distilled into a single terrible decision. She died there on the 5th of January 1589, aged 69, in a chateau jammed with soldiers, intrigue, and the odour of treason. The League would drive Henry III into alliance with the man he had spent years trying to keep at arm's length, Henry of Navarre, who would become Henry IV and convert to Catholicism with the famous line about Paris being worth a mass. Catherine did not live to see the pragmatic end of the religious wars she had laboured to moderate. The image of Catherine that floated across Europe during her lifetime hardened into a legend after her death. Pierre de l'Estoile's journals recorded court gossip with glee. Brantome's memoirs gave the air a sparkle, and slander in equal measure. Later writers like the 19th century Jules Michelet doubled down on the idea of a calculating Italian broodmother, a poisoner with an astrologer on retainer and a heart forged in Florence. The truth becomes more human when the paper trail gets used. Catherine's own letters show a woman balancing budgets while arranging banquets, agonizing over the health of her children, throwing her energy into every compromise she could squeeze from a room of armed egos. A few facts sand down the more creative accusations. The fork myth looks cute on dinner placemats and flimsy in history. Italy had refined table manners and forks long before Catherine's marriage, and forks already appeared in French inventories by the early 16th century. Catherine certainly imported cooks and tastes, including artichokes and sugarwork, but French cuisine did not need an Italian queen to invent it. The poison glove story surrounding Jeanne d'Albret remains unsupported. Contemporary medical descriptions and the absence of credible forensic detail point toward natural causes, not assassination by perfume. René the Florentine's role rests on gossip pamphlets rather than court records. Nostradamus did not serve as a personal doom whisperer with precise jousting forecasts. He published prophecies. Catherine liked them, and later generations retrofitted a quatrain to Henry to succour. Narrative convenience did the rest. The flying squadron was a household, not a sex cult. Brantome's storytelling flair made it marketable. Catherine's staff work made it real. Catherine did not invent ballet, though her patronage helped shape the French form. The Ballet Comique de la Reine, in 1581, communicated moral order for an audience desperate for it. Her power did not rely only on mysteries and men with lances. It rested on management. She stacked the royal council with men who could count, speak, and compromise. Michel de l'Hôpital headed that list, a chancellor whose reforms of the legal system and advocacy for toleration made him indispensable. She used ambassadors like couriers of nuance, instructing them with letters heavy on specificity. She calculated dowries and wove webs of marriage with a precision that turned family life into foreign policy. She performed grief when it helped, splendor when it soothed, and anger when it forced the last signature on a fragile truce. She endured almost absurd private losses. 3 of her sons wore the crown and died without living sons to succeed them. Francis XVI, dead at 16. Charles V, dead at 23. Henry III, assassinated at 37 in August 1589. 7 months after her own death, 3 daughters found themselves in marriages that drained their spirit. Elizabeth of Valois died at 23 as Queen of Spain. Claude, Duchess of Lorraine, lived quietly away from Paris. Marguerite became famous as the heroine of Alexandre Dumas and the anti-heroine of court rumour, her turbulent marriage to Henry of Navarre becoming a national spectator sport. Each death carved another piece off Catherine's hope for a simple legacy. She did not give up the aesthetics. Even as she wore black, she adored jewels and fabrics that caught candlelight like steady breath. She commissioned tapestries that recorded Valois triumphs as allegories. She designed entertainments that turned rivers into mirrors and gardens into stages. She built and then left the Tuileries unfinished because politics devoured time. Her Hôtel de la Reine in Paris showed off a freestanding column whose spiral staircase led to nothing but the sky, an architectural metaphor for her late-life priorities. The assassination at Blois of Henry of Guise remains the kind of scene historians have replayed with different lighting for centuries. Henry III had wearied of being a hostage to his own capital. He lured the Duke of Guise with a promise of negotiation and cut him down with a bodyguard, the famous Quarant Cinque, on the 23rd of December, 1588. The king ordered the Cardinal of Lorraine, the Duke's brother, killed the next day. Catherine, sick in bed, caught the fallout. She knew the effect of a political murder on a public already saturated with blood. Her son had destroyed his most dangerous rival and replaced him with something worse, a civil war stripped of handshakes. She died 13 days later. The chronicler L'Histoire noted the coincidence with a mix of awe and sarcasm. Catherine's enemies celebrated as if evil had left the room. Her allies mourned the only person capable of convincing France that calm counted as a policy. The big accusation, poison as her favourite verb, remains the least proven part of her legend and the most durable. A 16th century court pulsed with poisons. Lead whiteners painted faces as deadly as political intrigue. Cosmetics and medicines shared bottles. Spouses died suddenly because everyone died suddenly in a world of sepsis, plague and lumrod. Catherine's apothecary, René the Florentine, did supply perfumes and pomades. Mercury crept into cosmetics. Arsenic existed in the toolkit for everything, from rat control to medical applications. That background makes any death at court instantly suspicious. A shocking number of those suspicions attached to one woman who had the audacity to be foreign, powerful, and unamused by failure. Catherine's own words: dismantle the caricature with the dull elegance of a ledger. Her letters harp on money, obedience, roots, dates, the impossible task of herding proud men toward a compromise. She complains about bad roads, praises good ambassadors, and warns about factional leaders with the tone of a woman who fired the last 3 and wishes she could fire the rest. When she describes the state in crisis, she sounds like a project manager with a portable altar. When she addresses her children, she sounds like a woman who lost too many of them and expects the survivors to behave. Her life's comic touches do provide relief. She adored handiwork to such a degree that courtiers muttered about her teeth. She staged a banquet where the dessert table arrived on a miniaturized mechanical ship, because nothing communicates royal stability like sugar art with a keel. At Censo, she pioneered fireworks displays that almost certainly terrified more dogs than any event in the Loire since the Romans. She enjoyed the game of musical chairs with favourites and factions, and once boasted, with the dry pride of a shepherd, that none of her household had been caught stealing. When she replaced Diane de Poitiers at Chenonceau, she resculpted the place like a woman, correcting a former roommate's taste. And every fountain sang the song of victory. She introduced no Italian wonder that the French did not already know, but she consolidated an entire era's taste and beamed it through her entertainments. She did not invent the corset, but her court made stiff bodices, a style that felt like a warning to lungs and suitors alike. She did not bring heels to France, but she wore them as a 5-foot-tall ruler needs to in rooms full of taller men. She understood optics. She understood that silk whispers louder than a sermon when the room is choosing sides. The numbers underline the accomplishment. Between 1562 and 1598, France fought 8 wars of religion. Catherine managed the monarchy during the first 6.5 of them, from her regency beginning in 1560 to her death in 1589. She maneuvered through 6 peace edicts of major consequence: Saint-Germain in 1570, Beaulieu in 1576, Bergerac in 1577, Flax in 1580 among them, each stitched together from threats, payment, and careful language that left everyone slightly unhappy and still breathing. She oversaw a royal progress that reached more towns than most French noblemen visited in their lives. She married children into Spain and Lorraine and tried to marry one into England by dangling her son Francis at Elizabeth I in 1579, a negotiation that produced magnificent gifts and no wedding. She lost 3 sons to illness and assassination and used the strength left over to keep the crown out of the gutter until the Bourbons arrived. Historians who weighed Catherine without inhaling the pamphlet's perfume came away impressed by the endurance and skeptical of the slander. J. Next, Leonie Frieda and Nicholas Sutherland translate her choices into a kind of math. Denis Crouzet emphasizes the deep religious anxieties of the era that made moderate politics feel like impiety. Mac P. Holt narrates the wars with an eye for how cities and rural communities fed the violence. Their combined work helps refocus the lens. Catherine emerges as a central figure in a state that nearly fell apart. She lacked the resources to rule like an autocrat and the ideology to rule like a saint. She ruled like a mother with a list and a stopwatch. The images that live in tourist brochures still tell some of her story. The Black Widow in high collar and diamonds. The Tuileries that no longer exists as a palace, replaced by gardens tourists cross to reach the Louvre. Chenonceau's gallery, bright as a hymn, and built by a woman accused of villainy to house the memory of a marriage that hurt. The column of the Hôtel de Soissons, rising awkwardly from a modern market district, a fossil of astrological obsession in a city of grocery lists. The Valois tombs in Saint-Denis that she designed for the dynasty, a collaboration with the sculptor Germain Pilon, their white marble serenity belying the chaos that produced them. When Henry IV issued the Edict of Nantes in 1598, codifying toleration that Catherine had fought for in more provisional form, he walked the pragmatic path she had marked with exits and fire extinguishers. He also inherited her brand problem. The crowd does not award points for preventing disasters. It does not see. It awards points for spectacle. And Catherine had the misfortune of producing both spectacle and disaster in the same years. The spectacle comforted when it could, lied when it had to, and numbed for a night. The disaster entered the memory of Europe with woodcuts of heads on pikes. The moniker La Reine Noire stuck, in part because mourning gear photographs better in the mind than a compromise writ. Her family's Italian roots and the explosion of conspiracy theory printing in the 1570s did the rest. She became a ready-made villain in plays, novels, and later films. The philosopher of rumour never needs footnotes to be entertaining. the historian who reads her payroll does. Catherine de' Medici lived 69 years in a century that devoured famous people before breakfast. She financed palaces, propped up soldiers' pay, staged ballets, read horoscopes, negotiated with warlords, and forced a country to keep choosing a flawed peace over glorious ruin. She lost children and illusions, and never the habit of telling men to sit down and sign something. The poison that mattered in her hands was usually rhetoric, sometimes rumor, and occasionally a royal order sharpened to a lethal point. The power that mattered was persistence. Her legacy sits at the intersection of survival and scandal, a place she knew by heart. The popular version still features the gloves. It still features Nostradamus, predicting lances, and a secret room of vials under a staircase that smells like orris root. The archival version features a woman managing a civil war with a court budget and a calendar. Both versions thrive because both feel true to a century that mixed science and sorcery, perfume and plague, dance and death. Catherine understood the blend better than almost anyone. She mastered the optics without losing sight of the arithmetic. The joke the 18th century made at her expense. Italian witch in a French crown sells fast and misses the target. The punchline she wrote herself runs quieter. A dynasty survived her because she put the work in when everyone else rehearsed their speeches. She began as an orphan in a city that hated her name. She ended as the most formidable political operator of her generation in a kingdom that never stopped questioning her presence. The poison cabinet remains a rumor. The power remains a fact.